Welcome back to our regular session of the Board of County Commissioners meetings. This is Wednesday, March 19th. Welcome to all around the table. We're going to engage in a work session on our 25-27 strategic Lane County plan. So it's going to be an interesting 3 hours. I might want to remind everyone that when we're doing our work sessions around the room, the mics are still live. So don't give away your favorite chocolate chip recipe because I will definitely steal it. So just remember that's live. So without further ado, we've got a full day ahead of us. Annie Rose is here with us, with Director of the Moss Adams crew, and Judy Williams, our Chief of Staff. And I will leave it to you, one or the other, to direct us further. Go ahead.
Fantastic. Judy, any opening words or shall we get going?
Just welcome and thanks for being here. I'll turn it over to you.
Fantastic. Well, thank you all for being here for our second work session together. We really appreciate your time. We really appreciate you all squishing around this table so that we can have some good conversations together. We are going to be going through a few different items today as part of this work, but I do want to call out and recognize there's a bunch of people who are helping to support all of the strategic planning work behind the scenes. So a really big thank you to all of the staff members who are supporting this, moving it forward, and making sure that we can all be here today and have some good stuff to talk about. So big thanks to this crew. In terms of the Moss Adams team, you have a few of us in the room with you today. I'm Annie Rose. I'm joined by my colleagues Jessie and Claire in the back. Claire's going to be taking notes for us throughout the meeting, and so we'll be capturing all the good discussion there. In terms of what we are doing today, you will remember last time we went through a lot of the foundational statements, and we had some good discussions around things like your purpose statement, vision, mission, values, all of those pieces. We are going to come back to those with some additional feedback, but we're going to try and keep that conversation on the shorter side because we spent so much time last time on these. But we are going to come back to those pieces. We're going to spend more of our time today really looking at the strategic goals and the objectives. The objectives are really the new piece of information that we want to get a lot of good feedback on. And then right at the end, if we have time, we're also going to start a brainstorm activity around the activities that would go with each objective. But our goal really is to think about those goals and objectives and have that be the primary thing that we are discussing today and coming to a good sense of, I won't say consensus because that means everybody in the room is 100% happy with it, but I will say we all want to feel okay with how we are moving forward. That's the goal for a group this big. That's the bar that we'll set, is we want everyone to feel pretty good about these statements and the goals and the objectives. So that's what we're aiming for today. And then within that, we are going to take some breaks. As I said, we'll probably spend that first hour doing a bit of that recap, the discussion. Many of you took a survey between the last work session and this work session. Thank you so much for that input. So we're going to be revisiting and using some of that input to guide that discussion. And then we're going to have a break, and then we're going to go in and start those goals and objectives. We'll probably have one other break during the session as well, because I know 3 hours is a really long time to be in this room. So, as a reminder, some of the things that we are hoping you will do when we are together in this room for this work session is just having awareness of your participation. We would really like to hear from everyone in the room. We would also love it if you've been speaking up a lot to step back and make sure there's space for others to share as well. We know that all of you have computers and phones and many other electronic gadgets that are pulling your attention, which is totally fair. We understand if you need to step out, take a phone call, do what you need to do, please do that. When you're in the room, we will ask that for the most part, you can just use your technology respectfully so that you can be as present as possible with those of you who are all together here. Please take care of yourselves. If you need to stand up, leave the room at any moment, please do so. Another piece that we always say in here is being okay with not resolving everything. Some of these discussions are going to be open-ended. We might not come to a resolution. For any of the topics where we're not really seeing a good general consensus around something, we will take those away, do some more work on them, and bring them back to this group. So again, this doesn't have to be, we don't have to be making final decisions on anything. We're really working toward a draft of a strategic plan that then we're going to be able to share with your staff, with your community members to get even more input on. So that's what we're aiming toward. Being curious, being respectful, and not talking over each other. We know this is a really big group. If we need to, we will have people raise hands so that we can make sure that we're hearing from everyone. So, any questions on any of that background material? Yeah.
Last time that slide also had being respectful, reserving judgment, and grace, giving grace.
Yes.
I would assume those three are still there also.
Absolutely. We simplified it just because there's a lot on that page, but I think the idea of giving each other grace is a really important one because these conversations can be challenging sometimes. We're talking about really important things that impact your community, and people can have really strong feelings about them. So coming with a sense of curiosity and openness and trying to understand other people's perspectives is always an important part of this work. Thank you for flagging that. Okay. So, without further ado, we are going to get into these fundamental statements that you provided feedback on in the survey. And within that, quick project overview. I think we all know why we're here. We're creating a strategic plan for the county to guide this work, set the strategic priorities for the county moving forward. Another key piece here before we get into it is just a reminder, we are gathering input here today from the Board of Commissioners, from management. We have already gathered input from staff. We will be coming back to staff to gather additional input. We've also gathered input from the community, and again, we're going to be coming back to the community. So this is just one piece in an ongoing iterative process, but we want to highlight that this discussion here is not the only element of the planning work that's happening as well. And one other piece, and this is going to come up a little bit today. We talked about this slide the last time we were here, but it's the difference between what does the Board of Commissioners do versus the management team. And I think essentially it gets down to this concept of the Board of Commissioners ultimately decides what we are going to do, what that future is that we're aiming toward, what those key priorities are. The management team decides how we are going to accomplish those priorities. And this will come up today because we're talking about goals and objectives, which are really set that high, big picture vision, right, of where are we going, versus the activities are often around the how we are actually going to accomplish this. And so as we go through especially the next phases of this work, we are, for example, going to be working more closely with the management team to refine those activities because that's an appropriate part of their role here. So we just wanted to highlight this, make sure that this is a reminder. Ultimately, the Board of Commissioners will be adopting this plan, certifying this plan to move forward. So I think it's helpful to just to remember that we have a mix of roles in this room here today as well. And then I think the last piece, just in terms of where we are in the planning process, we have this second joint work session that's happening today. After this, as I mentioned before, we're going to be starting to actually put together a draft of the strategic plan. We're going to be getting additional review from this team. Then we're going to be getting additional input from community members and employees, bringing that back to this group, updating it, getting more feedback from you all before it actually goes forward to finalize. So we've got a few more pieces, but we are about halfway through this work right now. Okay, now we can get to foundational statements. Any questions that we're looking at about any of those orientation pieces? Okay.
Looks good.
Great. So, the last time we met, we asked for feedback and we had discussions around all of these foundational statements. So your purpose, vision, mission, values, core behaviors, and strategic lenses. As I mentioned, you've got a lot going on here. There's a lot of kind of these guiding statements that help you decide how are we going to do work, what are we focused on together. And so we did a survey, as I mentioned before, of you all to get additional feedback on some of the proposed changes that came out of the last session. And now we're going to go through those. I was saying earlier to Judy, usually this part of the process is very quick because the survey results are very decisive. This crew, however, had some perfect ties, which is not totally normal, so I think we'll probably have to spend a little bit more time on some of those ties to make sure that we have good tiebreakers. But it's great. It means we've got a lot of good opinions in the room, a lot of good perspectives. So the first one that we wanted to go through was your purpose statement, to improve lives. I think a lot of the feedback that we talked about last time was that we liked the simplicity of this statement, we liked the power of this statement, and that this really connected to people's sense of their own personal mission of why you're all here, why you do the work that you do. You're here to improve people's lives. That's ultimately, I think, a shared vision that you all have. But we also talked about the fact that the purpose statement and the mission statement and the vision statement, there's just a lot of statements going on here as well. So we asked in the survey, do you want to keep it? Do you want to incorporate this into another statement itself? Or remove the purpose statement entirely? And based on the survey feedback, the majority came by just one vote into let's incorporate the purpose statement into another one, either the mission or the vision statement. Most people liked the purpose statement. So I think that's the other thing to take out of this is that we like this concept, but maybe there's another way that we could be using it. So I'm actually going to come back to the purpose statement because I want to share how we could potentially weave it into some of these other statements as well. But sharing that first off. The second one we asked about was the vision statement. Lane County is the best county in which all can live, work, and play. There was some good feedback about saying this has some of the core concepts that we want, but best seemed like a tricky idea to have. We don't know if that really resonated with people. And that certainly lined up with what employees said about the statement, which was that best really didn't resonate for them for the most part. So we asked about, we had the original statement here, and then we have the suggested revisions here. And we have two up here because you were perfectly tied on this one. The first potential is Lane County is a thriving community where all people can live, work, and play. So essentially replacing best with the concept of thriving community. The other one is just Lane County is a community where all people can flourish or where all people can thrive. I think that would be a good alternative as well. But just saying we're a community where people can be thriving, flourishing. So what I'd like you to do, turn to a neighbor. We're going to talk for 2 minutes about which of these statements is really resonating for you today, now seeing them side by side, which you think should be moved forward. Any questions about that? Okay, have at it.
Take that, Rob. I got him first.
That's fine. We can let's do it three.
Actually, no, it's
Which one do you like?
yeah. Well, I thought about this.
Big Island, Rhonda.
Also is we need to simplify it.
Yes.
It's getting so wordy, word salad on everything. But I agree, I don't like the ending in flourish.
No, thrive. How about thrive?
Yeah.
How about Lane County is a community where all people can thrive?
Yeah, it's just simple.
That's, I know, but it's aspirational. It's aspirational. So do you want aspirational in a business thing?
I think
I feel the same way. I like to even better. I agree that Thrive is better than Flourish. We've had a little bit of feedback that Thrive is
married here, but I aspirational statements are fine.
and highly publicized as a word. Some, you know,
That's true.
where all people can live their best lives is another option. So there's, I think, that end part of just wordsmithy, but our folks like the word Thrive a lot too. So,
Well, but I mean, they're all that way. All people can live.
yeah, there's Thrive.
I mean, you're gonna find my goal out of
This way, I think that you have to do one of those things. Flourishing is simplifying. As a silly thing, it's thriving.
You know what a wise man says in an email to me?
And then
All right, I'm hearing a slight pause, so I'm going to bring us back together. We're going to go through this pretty quickly.
Yeah.
Right now in the room,
Yeah.
I'm going to take a show of hands.
The river guide.
Between option 1 and 2, right now in the room, who would say, I'm more in line with option 1?
The
We've
abolition.
got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. How about option 2? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. Okay. So does anyone want to make the case for option 1?
I didn't raise my hand, but I'm option 1, by the way.
Great. Anyone want to speak to why they think that option might be better? Yeah.
I just find the words live, work, and play more descriptive for people to really latch onto and understand conceptually speaking, because flourish is fairly generic.
Yeah.
And I like more specificity and maybe more different.
Yeah, it feels a little bit more tangible because you can just imagine what living, working, and playing versus flourish is a pretty high concept, or people might read very different things into that. Yeah, great. Anyone else on option 1? Okay, how about option 2? Anyone want to make the case for that one?
Well, we actually liked it with the modification of substituting thrive for flourish.
Thrive and flourish. So we're just a community where all people can thrive.
Yeah, and because it also, we actually thought this, it speaks to the community both as the place where people are doing the things and the people doing the things, whereas the first one is just about what the people do. So it kind of leaves out like all the infrastructure, environmental parts of the community.
Yeah, okay, great.
Yeah.
Was there a hand over here too?
I sort of was thinking a thriving community where all people can flourish, but the simplicity aspect is really good. So one question I just had on, because I did like the second one better because of the simplicity. We say a community, and I know sometimes, like, we are a county, but within the county, we're a big county, there are multiple communities. I mean, and communities tend to identify not with the county as their community, but their sort of city or neighborhood or town or whatever. So I don't know if there's a distinction there.
Yeah, absolutely.
Maybe it's a place.
It's a place,
A place.
we're all communities.
Right. Here and then there.
I agree with Thrive, but I was wondering, just because as a recent person here, is this really intended, is it Lane County intended to be the geography, or is it intended to be government? Like, for me, a vision statement would be, Lane County works to make our community a place where all people can thrive. If it's about the government. I just don't know whether that's means
The organization.
Yeah. It's a really great question, and I would say it's done both ways. So sometimes the vision statement is a description, the vision that we have for the county government and sort of our ideal future.
Right.
I would say more often it's a description of the ideal future of the community that we are trying to get toward, because
Then
our
never
mission
mind.
statement is there. But no, I think you're spot on in terms of it can be either way. So
But I
think
do like Thrive
clarifying
better than
that.
Flourish.
Great, okay.
And I'll tell you why I don't like Thrive when it comes to people. Because people thrive at other people's expense. Communities thrive as a whole. So I don't like Thrive personally. I'm thriving, but because I've taken stuff from you. So and that's kind of esoteric, I think, in its application. I do like the first one because it talks about our community, which has to be all of Lane County. It has to be, and where all people can live, work, and play. That implies that they're going to thrive at their own level. I believe it's simple enough. Lane County is a thriving community where all people can live, work, and play. I love it.
Great. Okay, so this is one where I'm gonna say we're not gonna have resolution today, but we're gonna come back, work on it a bit more, and bring this back to you, because I think there's some very important points that we might be able to bring together into what I'm hearing as we want a simple statement. We want a statement that really clarifies and is focused on the people who are here and what they can do in a practical way, but we also want to keep it as concise as possible. Is that fair? Great.
And just one other piece of feedback from the listening sessions we did in Health and Human Services. Play did not resonate with our staff.
Yeah.
Overwhelmingly, because of the incredible barriers that the people we serve face. It felt like it's just like getting basic needs for everyone would be huge, and play is like above and beyond that. It felt a little bit elitist in some ways to some of our staff.
Yeah, thank you for that. Yeah, and sometimes play comes up when we think about specifically like youth communities. I think that that's often where that word is front and center, but I think that that's a really fair point in terms of, this is a statement that has to stand ideally for all members of the community as well, and we don't want to alienate people through it too. Thank you. Yeah.
I just add, I guess I interpreted play as recreate, which is a huge aspect of Lane County. So maybe the word is just not the right word.
Yeah.
I'm with you, Heather. I like recreate because we have, how many parks do we have? That's for recreation.
Yeah,
40.
that's a pretty big part of the kind of identity of Lane County is recreation.
Just as we work on sort of nuancing what the statement looks like, I think it's important that we remember a vision. There's a lot of these different statements talk about a purpose and a mission and behaviors and values. This vision is sort of the one statement that is aspirational. It's that thing that is like bold, hairy, and audacious, always out of reach. And so it's not the place that we should I'm just offering this as a general thing where we should try to say, this is what we do, it really is like the thing we're striving for that we may never actually accomplish, but we're always going after it.
Yeah, absolutely. It's your most aspirational statement of all of these. This is the one where we can put our aspirations, and we should put our aspirations. Yeah, thank you. Okay, on that note, I am going to keep us rolling. The next piece we looked at was the mission statement. We responsibly manage available resources to deliver vital community-centered services with passion, drive, and focus. A lot of people liked passion, drive, and focused. A lot of people said responsibly managing available resources to start off a mission statement is not a very exciting way of talking about what we are doing. So what changes can we make here? So this was one of the areas where, and this came through in some of the comments on the survey, can we bring the purpose statement into the mission statement? We improve lives by delivering community-centered services with passion, drive, and focus. So we'll just take 30 seconds, talk to the person next to you about how this statement is hitting you, this proposed one.
Well,
I suggest the second.
Oh, you did, yeah. Well, yeah, because you're a finance guy.
I did. I wanted to be comfortable, and I feel like this
I know what
it
core
doesn't
public
roll off
services
the
are.
tongue. Right.
I know, community center.
Community center, is that the right phrase? When I feel just kind of out of place, but I'm not sure why.
well, and what about, say, rural services?
You know what I mean, right? It's
Community centered.
I know.
These people are
rolling, the roll commission.
I would say delivering core public.
When we are in leadership meetings, it is nice.
I don't know, I would swap out community centered with core public. That's it, I would do that. Central delivery. I like that.
I can yeah, but I like it, I do like it.
Okay, I'll bring us back together. I said 30 seconds, gave you a minute. Still very not much time to talk about it. But I heard a lot of
I agree.
yeah, I think maybes in this room. So I'd love to hear, how did this initial statement strike you? Yeah.
Initially, it struck me as one of those writer's tricks where they always have 3 points, and no, to get you to understand what they're talking about. But if the intent of this particular phrase is to minimize our vision, purpose, and to get everything down to one statement, I think it's close.
Great, great. And ideally, your mission statement should be something that you could remember and say to explain what do we do as a county. What is that? Yeah.
Because I don't exactly know what community-centered means, I would swap out essential. By delivering essential services.
there you go.
Passion, drive, and focus, just to make it simple.
Great. Any other thoughts? Yeah.
I feel like we're missing the systems piece. We do
Yeah.
more than services, so that's just missing for me still.
So one way that some of the counties we've worked with have described this is you could say services and systems, services and infrastructure is another phrase. I'm curious if either of those hit for this group.
None of this rolls off the tongue.
Yeah.
We improve lives. I mean, if we want our leaders to walk around and say, we are committed to the mission, and to just recite that mission, the 3 words is, I think, really powerful, and just call it mission. Don't, so.
Yeah. Great.
And kind of connecting off of that is, it's not just the leaders walking around saying this. To me, I'm thinking about that frontline person in parks or a road crew or on the IT team or in one of the clinics. They've got to be able to really, are they going to remember all of it, or are they going to remember we're all here no matter what our roles are, like from the line staff all the way up through to improve lives, right? And I think it gets harder the more that you add.
More words. Yeah.
I agree with.
Yeah.
The we improve lives is very direct. The other concern, I mean, I like the wording of this, but it's just like no one's going to remember all the words. And then when we talk about services, I agree with services, we don't include systems. The other thing we don't include is in kind of that longer statement, and this is the thing with mission statements, there's the tendency to sort of list everything. They get really long because like, oh, we forgot this, and then we got to add that, and then you have something that no one can relate to or remember. But it's services, it's systems. It's also, we solve challenge. We're a big part of what Lane County does is identify what the needs of the community and solve problems. So, and that is outside of the services that we deliver. So I worry that, again, if we start listing all of the things, then it becomes this long, whereas what has been for me so powerful, and I think for a lot of our employees so powerful about We Improve Lives, is every employee can relate to it in some way, regardless of your role in the organization, right? And we have a very diverse workforce that provides a lot of different services. Everyone can get up in the morning and go, how am I connected? Oh, well, I'm actually, everything I do, even if I'm balancing budgets or a healthcare provider in a clinic or a prosecutor in the courts, I'm trying to improve someone's life today.
All right, on that note, if we changed it to We Improve Lives, how many people would be in favor of that today? Okay, this is excellent. Well done.
Check that box. Good job.
Check that box. Excellent.
We did resolve something.
We resolved something. Look at that. We've got
Some
our
things
one
do
for
get
today. So that's excellent. Wonderful work. Great. Okay,
What's
on
going
that
on?
success, let us keep going. The next area that we looked at was value statements: integrity, excellence, equity, and respect. And this was an interesting one to come through because we asked, do we even need to maintain these values? And in terms of the survey, the majority said yes, these are important to maintain. We want to see these values continuing within the strategic plan. A good chunk of you also said yes, we want to maintain them, but could we bring them into our core behaviors or strategic lenses in some other way to further simplify these statements? And then a couple said, I think we could get rid of these two in order to streamline. So, with that said, we also asked you about splitting up equity and respect, and this was a great tie that you have here. The concept behind this was equity and respect, while they are interconnected concepts, are separate concepts in terms of what they mean about our values and how we go about the work that we do. I will say, when we asked your staff about this, there was an overwhelming response to say, yes, let's split them up, because we think of these things as being different concepts that we bring into our work, and we'd like to treat them separately as well. So, knowing those two pieces, I will go back one. Knowing those two pieces, I think where we're at today is maintaining the values, and I'd love you to chat with your neighbor about the concept of, do we want to maintain the values as they are? Do we want to split up equity and respect, or do we want to incorporate these, or do we want to incorporate these into some of our other pieces, knowing that things like your strategic lens already has the concept of equity, for example, included in it. So, take a couple minutes, chat about what you're thinking on the values today.
Well, full disclosure, now that we changed the mission statement, made it 3 words. What are the 3? Exactly what I wanted to do. I see a path to simplifying this thing. These things get rid of them. Originally, I was like, yeah, we can keep them, but I would like to see that survey changed with our new mission statement myself.
And it's not
3 words says that.
in health and human services.
Do we need to get into every part of what we're going to know?
Yeah, with the equity and respect.
I guess I can claim to be, I haven't been around long enough to know whether it's necessary to have. Well, I've seen more.
There we go. This was
Yeah, that's my problem. It's a kaleidoscope. There's too many lenses, Commissioner. If you like, sometimes I should be taking LSD. Have you seen the Buffalo Wild Wings commercial they're playing? I spent a bunch of time in the shop this weekend. Woodstow going, the rain pouring down. It was great. Football, or excuse me, basketball was on. Just there's a bunch of tournaments and stuff. With March Madness, they've got Buffalo Wild Wings is on a bunch of advertising. And the Buffalo's there. And he has got 14 different pairs of glasses on so he can watch every game. Yeah. And it shows it through his glasses. It's just like a perfect example of what you just said.
A fly is very
It was hilarious.
So this,
I believe
that's the feedback about the word excellence, and I don't see that reflected in there.
strategic plans for the
Yeah.
Integrity, excellence,
Yes. Okay.
So as simple as possible. I do.
And I also think
I
it's
do as little with that we do. Now,
The lenses are supposed to be actual things that are how we make decisions. The behaviors are how we act. The lenses are how we make decisions. Because
But that being said, we are 5 today, 2 years ago, we had a different
Right.
problem.
Math,
2 years ago.
So they put something in the records, they're forgettable.
I mean, it's fine.
So it should be a question.
We are, we're the only transitory ones here.
Yeah.
You all have jobs. We're at the wheel.
That's a whole other conversation you and I can have. If you're around for 4, I know that. If you're nice to him. Yeah, well.
So what do we think?
I don't know how important that is.
it's not typically something.
That was my thought when we're reading that. We just came from.
I agree with you, simplification is a good idea when you're talking about high level things, but I'm also pragmatist like in this far, and so I'm more into the tactics.
Well, I mean, and yeah, but then that goes 2 ways, right? You could add tags, you could add stuff. I know. Then it becomes.
So you have to have the strategy that the tactic applies to.
Right.
What is, you know what I mean? Like, we want to make sure that adults in custody don't come back. Okay?
Yeah, we do.
I know,
That's very real.
Yeah. Like, what does it mean to say that the organization where values
So simplistically, the first,
I don't know what it translates to. What is it a reflection of?
in 81, we finalized it. And we didn't have a mission statement, we had a value mission. So the value was combined with the mission. I'm not including that.
Yeah.
Because it's for the word.
Well, and especially since we just got the vision statement.
Well, and 2 words. And it is confusing to me, you know, you've had a mission statement, a value statement, you know, there was a third one there, we just, I've gotten lost already. The first one we started with wasn't vision or value, it was something else. Vision. Vision. You had vision, value, and mission, it's like,
Isn't it stewardship? Yes.
I don't even remember the vision anymore.
So I think the value statements are already explanatory.
Yeah.
And that's, you know, wordsmithing and words.
I'd like to bring it back to this, yes, there's all
So you just see another.
I'm gonna say.
Okay,
Yeah.
I'm hearing a lull, so I'm gonna bring the group back together. All right, who wants to kick us off on this one? Any thoughts on whether we want to just keep the value statements as is or incorporate them into some of the other statements that we have? Yeah.
I still struggle with how we relate to the values, like what, all the other pieces, you know, the mission statement is kind of this is what we do, the vision is what we're aspiring to, the behaviors are how we act, the lenses are how we make decisions. I mean, on a good day, that's what we try to make those things about. The values, like, I get that organizations have values, and everyone wants to say, like, what are our values as an organization? And then, but when we talk about integrity, excellence, equity, respect, so I'm asking the broader question, beyond just whether or not to keep or separate those things. I don't understand how we relate to the values, how they're actionable in any way, how they, like, what does it mean to say that our value is integrity? Or what does it mean to say that our value is excellence? Or what does it mean to say that our value is equity?
Yeah.
You know what I mean? It's like a statement, like we say we value this thing, but there's not actually any sort of action that's connected to that. And so that's where I'm struggling is I think this is my sense that the hesitancy from folks to do away with the values is, oh my gosh, we can't not have values. We're a large organization that is serving the public, and how do we not have value statements? But then actually when we talk about what are the values, how do they translate into something meaningful? I don't know that, at least for me.
Yeah. It's interesting because I think when we talk about values, you have them described in your core behaviors and your strategic lenses. That is often when we are describing how the values are meant to serve in a strategic plan. They're meant to say, how are we going to act when we show up at work every day, and how are we going to make decisions? What are those fundamental values that we're going to use to help us make decisions? And here you've kind of separated them out, which I think it serves you well to have the specificity that you have in the core behaviors and in the strategic lenses, but it leads to this question of, okay, well, what are the values? Do we just say these two things are our values when taken together? Because I do know too, especially when we're thinking about some of the service applications, and I think you spoke to this last time, around it's important to be able to say these are our values as a county. That's a critical thing in many different settings. But it is an interesting space that you've gotten into where you have this great specificity in these two other statements, and I'm almost wondering whether we can just call those, these are your values, we're just describing them in these other ways. So I'm curious. And I think there's a hand up over here.
Well, I'd be very interested in exploring incorporating them into something else. But my original thought process was on the equity and respect part, keeping them as is, given that equity is such a targeted word right now, and for some of my employees, they get respect, but they may not really get, equity, and, tying the two together, that they kind of go hand in hand. So there was that, but then I had a thought of, we're also trying to evolve some of our equity work to this cultures of belonging piece, and whether belonging could step in to replace this conundrum we have.
Yeah, absolutely. And in that sense, it might step in a core behavior in terms of we are creating culture of belonging, or even in a strategic lens as well. Any other thoughts, especially on this concept of how do we use our values? What is that bringing to us if we have them as separate statements?
I listened really hard to what Mokrahysky had to say, and I agree with that. No small part of that is what are you leaving out? It's like the Monty Python skit, the Spanish Inquisition. Our chief weapon is surprise. But what about fear? Oh yeah, surprise and fear. It's what are we leaving out, and what means, and then you say the word belonging. That means something to some people, doesn't mean a thing to other people. So the simpler we keep it, and the more we integrate it into other statements, I think the easier it is for everybody to say, yes, that's me. So.
Thank you.
I reference our core values every day.
Yeah.
And equity being a word that is in our core values is critical to me and the people who report to me. And if I were to then say, well, equity is our strategic lens, we don't have the core values, that does not carry the weight in my mind. Around our commitment, and now I think would be a really challenging time for us to make that change, especially in my department. So I would strongly advocate that we keep core values, and that equity is one of our core values. We talk about equity and respect differently in Health and Human Services. We will continue to do that. I don't have a strong feeling about whether the county separates it or not, but for us, it's very, very different, and just critical.
Yeah, and I think that's a really good point of any changes that you choose to make here, people will look at those changes and will read in a story to go along with why those changes were made, and some of them might be able to hear from this group why you wanted to make those changes, but some will not, and so we want to be thoughtful about how those changes may be received, both by employees and by members of the community as well. Yeah.
I think there's a reason to not remove that. I think there's more potential for harm by removing the values. There's no harm in keeping them. The goal isn't the shortest possible strategic plan, it's the right strategic plan for us that makes sense across the organization, that people can find their way. And when I see those, what I would like to see 4 bullets, but if they stay 3 with the second one being like a 2-parter, it's sort of the shorthand that then sets the tone for the more wordy parts of the plan. So I wouldn't want to just assume people will figure out and will read everything and come to the conclusion that our core values are these things. I see no harm in stating them and potential real harm in removing them.
Yeah.
Whether it's just misinterpretation, doesn't matter.
Yeah.
Act is the same.
Yep. Thank you. Any other thoughts on this? Yeah.
That's a great point, Commissioner Trieger. I mean, I was kind of balancing the two as if, if we shorten everything down to we improve lives, each person is going to take that context either in their equity lens or their performance lens or their integrity lens or their respect lens or whatever lens they want to view that in. They're going to take that personal and personally put forward that they want to improve lives. Removing those potentially for the fear of maybe repercussions is a consideration. But at the same time, I also hear Eve saying she's got over 800 and some employees. She's got nearly half the employees of Lane County that she's speaking for. I'm kind of on the fence about, making it simpler to say we improve lives. Take that in your own lane and perform at your highest level and purpose and excellence that you can, versus having some of these buzzwords connected that make people comfortable. I'm kind of struggling with that. So I'm on the fence.
Yeah, and I think that's a good point too about we don't want to remove things just for simplicity's sake. That's not a reason to do it. It might be a reason to remove if we are saying they're not adding value to the plan itself or how we are using the plan. But I think what I'm hearing here is that these value statements, at least in some parts of the organization, are adding a significant amount of value and would have potential repercussions. So I think this one might be one where we take this feedback back, think about it a little bit more, see what we might be able to bring back to you all. And the outcome of this might be just keeping these as they are and recognizing that they are serving different parts of the organizations in different ways. But I would love for our team to put a little bit more brain power into that and come back to you all. Does that sound good? And Judy, did you have a thought on that?
As you have this question here, I think one of the things that I struggle potentially more with is the excellence value, and so why I don't want to take this in a different direction with the moment here, but I think I really like the belonging piece that Dan brought up, and maybe potentially weaving that in. But I think there's a lot of struggle. Employees feel that too with the excellence.
Yeah. Well, and it's interesting because you also don't define these values. They're just a word, which is great for shortness and simplicity and concision. That makes it really easy to say these are our values, and I think there's a benefit to that. But it means that if you have a different interpretation of what excellence means or what respect and equity means, then we as a county leadership team haven't said, yes, this is what we mean by these concepts as well. And I think that you're speaking to that in terms of, I know that we had some conversation last time about excellence maybe feeling more elitist or having some background that is not the intention behind that. The intention behind that is really to say we show up and provide excellent service for our community members. I believe that that's the goal there. But if we don't define that, how do we know? Yeah.
Just one other sort of reflection that the way the values are now with integrity, excellence, and equity is reflected in other things. The other two are not. So I think there maybe is an opportunity to look at those other things like the lenses and the behaviors that are meaningful, I think, for us as we do our work. But it sounds like it's really important to have the statement of what the values are. So is there a way maybe to extract from the other things that actually have a lot of meaning, maybe the values that actually do exist? I guess what I'm questioning is, are integrity and excellence actually the values, because we don't say that anywhere else?
Yeah, and I think that's a question too, because one way you could deal with this is to bring excellence and integrity into, for example, your core behaviors and your strategic lenses. We could do it the other way around, rather than replacing values with those. Is there a way that we could make the ideas of integrity and excellence something that is very tangible and meaningful? And if not,
I worry about that because what we're saying is the behaviors have a lot of resonance and no one wants to touch them. And now we're going to take two things that we're saying don't really have a lot of resonance and we're going to incorporate them into some things that do.
Yeah. Yeah, because the core behaviors did, especially on the employee survey, people really resonate with those. That means a lot to people. And I do think that if you have that, we don't want to mess with what is working already. We're going to be changing other things. So yeah, I think that's a great point.
Yeah. I just feel like our core behaviors and our lenses are kind of how we embody our values, and so I am curious about that connection, and it may make sense just to leave it as is, but I think when I think of our core values and our lenses, that is integrity and excellence. That's how we do it as a county and as individuals. So I just see so much connection there and the tools that make it happen.
Yeah.
And the behaviors that make it happen.
Thank you for that. That's really important. So I think one of the things our team will think about is really what is the relationship between the values, the core behaviors, and the strategic lenses, and maybe that's the piece that we really need to focus on for this next iteration of this, and how do we kind of help define and clarify that relationship so that it all feels like a piece rather than having a couple values just hanging out over here. Yeah.
And if you don't have our code of conduct already.
Yes, we do.
Okay,
Yeah.
so that really is how the organization has defined the embodiment of our values, is through that code of conduct. It's all structured in that way, so I think looking to that as well would help inform that.
That's great. That's great. Thank you. All right, I'm going to keep us rolling here, but that was a great conversation. The last couple pieces that we wanted to talk about, core behaviors. I would say there was no feedback on this. People feel great about core behaviors. Do we need to have any further discussion on that? I'm seeing some head shakes saying we can keep rolling. Okay, so the last piece was the strategic lenses. I am not going to read all of this content, but we have stewardship of resources lens, equity lens, and collective impact lens. The last time that we had this conversation, a couple of key points that came up under stewardship of resources is the idea that we don't just steward resources, but we actively have to go out and seek resources to bring into the county in order for us to be able to do our work. So how can we include that there? Another important piece was around this collective impact lens, feeling like collective impact is a very specific, defined term, and that might not be what we're really talking about here, that this might more be about how do we have partnerships and work with others in order to see the impact that we want to see in the community. So with that, we provided some revisions, one around the stewardship of resources lens, which was just to add the idea of pursuing resources as part of this, or seeking resources to help balance economic, environmental, and social priorities. And I would say, okay fit. It sounds like there's some more work to be done here based on the survey results. The second one was around changing this to collaborative partnership lens rather than collective impact lens, and emphasizing that partnerships are going to be critical in solving our challenges that face the community, and really trying to center that concept within this description. We have some more positive responses here, but still a good number in the okay fit. So we are going to take our last partner conversation before we give you all a break and talk through the feedback on either of these concepts. Go for it.
Can you go back to the last one?
Yeah.
Wait, can we talk about all three? Sorry.
Just these
Just the
two,
collaborative
because these are the only
discussion.
two that had feedback on them. Yeah.
So I wasn't clear on what the suggested changes here.
Just adding the word pursuing
Oh.
to investing, maintaining resources. So just trying to get the concept of we actively go out and seek resources as well as investing and maintaining them.
Okay.
Yeah. Feel good? Should I go to the next slide?
Yeah.
Give you a couple minutes here.
I'm good with the first one.
Do you want a partner?
Okay.
Yeah, that's correct.
Join us, three musketeers.
Black is the old language.
Collective impact, I think, is like a particular level. We don't actually
This is like the how.
realize and so it's disingenuous. That's what I was disingenuous that we all say she's smart.
I think
I think this is where it gets wordy to me, kind of was.
it's harder.
Well, first of all, the pursuit of
I
is not
No matter how
reality.
large our strategic plan is.
Could that person make it shorter? I mean, that's.
Yeah,
And we get paid by the word. Strategic plan.
Oh, there's a problem, okay. All right, yeah.
They want to be able to drill down and focus on it.
I do like the idea of that lacks meaning. Collaborative partnership is, I think, what we
It's harder to focus on a project,
strive
something that's this large.
public-private versus public nonprofit.
one of the issues that
We're looking for wants to know which way they're headed. Throw a handful of pebbles out, make that work stuff thing. It's different than throwing a large rock down a hallway. So,
You know, finding exactly what I'm doing. I have 1 minute. You know, I could even argue the approach relies on common agenda. No, it really does going to be contributing to the common interest. And the way I would look at it is
Mediation on it.
because exactly. So I don't think it adds. Then you have, say, your strategic areas. Strategic
Is equally as long
point
as
goals.
changing one word.
And then under that,
is that the housing group?
so your mission is
That's like a broader
and the performance of our work,
Because collaborative partnership.
it doesn't happen here.
Yes.
Performance happens here. So when people in the world, you and I also, when we're doing one of these things, we have to know that it does this. You know, that we have to know that it is complementary to the strategy of that's always the key. Because the person in the work has to understand why they're work. Not just how to do it. It's like sergeants know how to do that. Officers know how to do it.
Yeah, on the stewardship. Yeah.
so then the issue with the lens is we can make action. Collab.
We're not actually.
How is that? How is it changing this?
Well, the only thing, the big issue for me there is that the same issue. There have been two people who are city council. And it's the city view. We have to find ways to make them work and for us to make us work with them. So to me, the partnership is manifested very strongly in the biggest government part. That is our mission. Make certain that we are always trying to build that. Because we can do it with Eugene. If we do it with Eugene.
You get on a plane to do that all the way to DC.
Don't what? I said if someone will bring it.
Oh, yeah. Part of that. Yeah, that would. Yeah. People work in the city and county. How that partnership is so So, I am I've got about
you back here. I tried to back together.
Just watch me stumble. Is that what you're laughing at? No, I stumbled and then you started laughing. I'm like,
Can we get a little
it's not all about you, Steve.
Would you like to move attention to the front of the room? I know your conversations are stimulating, but Annie Rose needs the floor. Thank you very much.
Thank you. I promise we will have a break in 2 minutes. I can feel the energy and the need for that here. We just want to get through this last little bit here. I'm going to say let's start with the discussion of this collaborative partnership lens update. How are we feeling about this? Does this seem like it's headed in the right direction? Any feedback there?
Could the green portion stand on its own?
Great question.
Well, that's a great idea.
There we go.
You said break.
Yes. Do we want to take a break and come back? Okay.
I think we were reading this as if the green is the proposed just new language, and the only change, we talked about partnerships happen both internally to the organization and the organization outwardly, like cross-departmentally and cross-teams, so just adding the words internal and external.
Internal and
partnerships to the green, and it's
good. So if we cut the rest of this, we feeling pretty good about that concept? Yeah, go for it.
I guess I'll be a devil's advocate. I am not partial to the partnership lens, because you can have partnerships, but they don't have collective impact.
Mm-hmm.
And to me, collective impact has a very specific meaning, and it incorporates partnerships, but partnerships doesn't necessarily incorporate collective impact.
Mm-hmm.
So I'm not a fan of the change myself.
Thank you for bringing that up. I'm wondering if we put the concept of collective impact into the description, would that help the concept of saying like we're doing the partnerships in order to increase and have collective impact? Maybe. Okay. Fair enough.
So, collective impact, I think, is a really powerful strategy to utilize. And we would need to do a whole lot of training, commit to a whole lot of training and changes to how we engage partners in order for us to be true to a strategic lens of collective impact. And that's where I'm feeling the tension is collective impact might be the ideal, but do we have the resources to really get from where we are now to get to there and maintain that as a strategic lens would be, I guess, a question for everyone.
Yeah, I don't know what that is, so I'm very curious what those things are that you're describing that you would need to do.
Go ahead, you know more about this.
I was just gonna say, what you have here are the core pieces of collective impact in here. So if you look at that actual framework, it is you have a common agenda with partners. You have shared measures that you are collectively measuring as a collective. You have coordinated activities. You have very intentional communication that's going back and forth. So it's a whole framework that is usually how you do a piece of work. We do operate this in our Live Healthy Lane work, that is with our community health improvement work. We do try, but I would say we don't do it in a true fashion, but it gives pieces. So it is a kind of rigid framework.
Just thought back here.
So for me, I actually like this because it gives us the ability to be opportunistic. There are times when we won't have time to align and make sure that there's larger goals, but if we can work on a tactical issue that gets something done for the community, it's kind of like, for me, it's like adding pursuing there. Well, of course we need to be pursuing resources. For me, I don't want us to wait and build alignment every time. If we can get stuff done quickly in the moment that works for us and works for another partner. So whether it's a private sector, a nonprofit agency, another government, I want us to be agile. And for me, the green words get me to the agility where I think we need to live, even if the larger, more perfect way of doing it is collective impact. Let's just focus on getting stuff done. So I'm a vote yes on this.
Any other thoughts? Yeah.
Well, I think this does beg the broader question about the lenses themselves. That I would argue of all of the kind of statement things we've walked through, the lenses are the thing where there's the greatest opportunity for us to actually, we say we have lenses, we've defined 3 lenses that we think are important to us. We actually utilize actively in terms of, in some places, the equity lens. We have that whole toolkit. We have a decision-making matrix around that. We haven't, Zach and I were talking, stewardship of resources, we do that every day by default, right? Because we sort of have to, but we haven't really defined, this is the one that's the least defined, and it's sort of we'd like to do this. It sounds like more the collaborative partner. We do collaborative partnerships in some places, but it's not. If the behaviors and the lenses are the 2 really actionable things, the behaviors I think we've nailed in terms of embedding and acting on in different ways. These, we've just kind of scratched the surface. So I say that all that as we move through the plan, and there's more work that has to happen on whatever we land on with the lenses. We have to be really clear about what is the expectation on how we use these lenses, and it needs to be the leadership in the organization that's using them in the same way that we use the behaviors in order for them to really have the value that they should.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think that that's something, even when we're going through this next phase where we're looking at goals and objectives, something that was actively missing, I think, from the last plan was a focus on partnerships. How are we actively partnering with others? And I can imagine that might be a lens that you all can use as you're reviewing these and saying, where are we actively bringing that in? So yeah, I appreciate that a lot. Okay, so it sounds like we might do a bit more tinkering on the statement here in general, but it sounds like, I think, majority at this point is feeling like collaborative partnerships is the right direction to go. Can I get a raise of hands on this is generally headed in the right direction? Okay, great. Fantastic. Thank you for that. Thank you all for sitting through the first hour and your active participation. These are great conversations. We really appreciate it. Let's take a 10-minute break here and we will regroup.
Minutes.
begin so that we can get you out of here on time. So, we wanted to come to our strategic goals, and we chatted about some of these last time. We again got some feedback on these, so we're going to go through that before we talk about the objectives. And within this, just as a reminder, when we're thinking about a strategic plan, we have the foundational statements, and those are at the top. Those should flow throughout the rest of the plan. Then beneath that, we will have your primary strategic goals. These are the big picture areas of saying these are the priorities for the county in the most high general way. And then under each goal, we have specific objectives, and within each objective, we have specific activities that really describe how we are going to accomplish the goal. So all of these things act together, and today we're going to be talking about all these pieces that we have highlighted here in green. So, as we did before, we got your feedback on the survey. We looked at the previous goal statements. And the last time we had talked, the basic consensus was we think that these are still the right areas to focus on, but we want to refine the definitions to make the definitions clearer, more specific, and more concise. So that's what we did with your survey feedback. And you'll see here on the left-hand side, we have the previous statement. Things that are crossed out in red were pieces that were deleted. Things that are highlighted in orange are pieces that were moved but incorporated into the new proposed statement. And pieces on the right-hand side in green are new words, concepts, ideas that came in. So, what I'm going to ask you to do now is get into groups of 3. Let's change it up just a little bit. Try and bring in someone new to your group of 3 and chat about, for a few minutes, these changes. Do we feel good about these changes? Anything else that we might want to refine? And we're going to go through this fairly quickly.
You can't join mine.
That's right.
What are you trying to? Actually, I suppose you could, because we're.
Oh, what, we got 3?
I suppose you could.
Be our third.
Okay.
Yeah. Oh, hey.
Statement of the safe, healthy cat.
Well, I'm glad it's shorter.
I just don't remember.
Plus.
Frick.
And how? Yeah.
Integrated.
For sure.
So at first I'm indifferent because I never.
What
is integrated?
I stay at the top level.
Fair. There's a lot of words.
I don't have a problem. I just don't know what offensive line.
A lot of words.
That's a good idea, generally speaking.
I know it's integrated house, kind of combined arms approach where we failed.
You have artillery, air, and ground.
So say that again.
So
you
is
want
that-
the behavioral health piece in?
No, I like not having.
Oh, you like not having.
Because I don't think, I think
Okay, so
it's an incomplete, it's always going to be an incomplete list. And it.
This is having goal 1. This doesn't really road yet.
And certainly in the action.
Is this supposed to be all inclusive?
Like, are they?
Or is it not? Just goal 1.
I don't think that is. It's hard to.
You don't know what 2, 3, 4, 5, 6.
Yeah, I think it might be
How many goals are there?
I'll say that.
Because transportation's missing.
Their position has health
Planning's
outcomes.
missing.
That's that comes over
That
here.
was what.
So that's a different. Oh, there's the goals. They're there. Yeah. It's a good thing we got far with this. We were lost. Healthy. Okay, now I get it. Healthy. That now, but it was a much nicer
There's a
meeting.
little ambiguity there.
Now it makes sense because it's health.
I mean, equitable fine.
Subtle.
Coordinated or?
Like the systems, how.
Especially.
Yeah. Now it makes sense to me because now that I see it. I just don't know what it means.
I said it tongue in cheek.
Integrated means ground troops, air, and artillery. Well, that's what I was saying, Sheriff, HHS, but it means health. Is that financially healthy?
Like we're, I don't know, but we're.
How does this actually get incorporated?
Integrated sheriff's office into our health.
Yeah, I think at the higher level,
We have
we can get.
398 AICs. That's a good point.
Yeah, I mean, it is the core.
That's integrated. When we do public and community health in custody settings, because we have 400 people who are on breakfast. I'm sold, and more medical supplies. I'm sold, I get it.
Figure out what needs to be done.
Aspiration meals. Meals on
I wouldn't leave that.
They have roughly. Depends on how the budget goes. Yeah.
Okay, I'm gonna bring us back together here.
Yeah, I think so.
Yeah, you could go from that to that.
We're doing great. Okay, I know there's good conversations going on. I'm sorry to cut you off. When we look at the suggested revision, when we're aiming to make this a little bit more concise, a little bit more clear, how are we feeling about this? Positive? Yes, positive. Okay, any thoughts? Feedback? I think there's comment here.
I like the brevity, perfect, good job. Deliver, and it seems like deliver equitable, but it seems like we're repeating equitable a lot in this plan. Perhaps maybe it wouldn't be necessary to repeat it here. Maybe a thought would be deliver coordinated services to support health, housing, and public safety. Equitable and integrated just kind of felt a little awkward together. They didn't kind of like resonate smoothly together, so that's just 2 cents.
Great, thank you. Any other thoughts on the suggested revision? Yeah.
Just minor technical thing, if you wanted, just get rid of the comma and put and, safe and healthy county. I just think as a title it reads better rather than safe, comma, healthy county. But I don't know, maybe like.
We had the same thought actually, and I wasn't sure sort of where that originally came from. I'm curious if anyone who was around when safe, healthy county was developed, how do you feel about just changing to safe and healthy county? Does that feel good?
Vote for me. I'm just raising my hand.
Oh, great.
Sorry,
Yeah,
school.
excellent. Okay, we might make that change then, because I do think that it just simplifies the read of the goal a little bit more. Great. Any other thoughts? Are we feeling like pretty good? It sounds like we might be able to do some additional shortening, but anything else conceptually on this one?
Did other groups struggle with integrated?
Yes. Yeah.
Just like what integrated means?
But Commissioner Farr had an example. Had a good one, I thought, if I can share it.
You can.
Because I was I was like making a joke, buddies. And will Eve want to integrate the sheriff's office into her program? And
Yes, we're providing case management services in the jail.
that was his example. And then that was integrated.
That's because Eve told me. For us, I think it felt aspirational, and sometimes it's just going to be coordinated as opposed to fully integrated. And, you know, is the goal to completely integrate things, or is it to make sure that we're as coordinated as can be and integrated where it really makes sense?
So integrated might be our aspiration, and coordinated might be where we end up with some of our current services. Is that?
I'm just not sure we want to commit to always thorough integration.
Curious, any thoughts on that? Yeah.
But aren't all these pretty much aspirational? We're not gonna be perfect all the time.
What?
Excellence is a core value.
Yes.
I'll contend that there's a certain group of people that we have to be perfect all the time, because most people in Lane County have a choice. But our AICs don't have a choice. And Eve, you mentioned it. You know, the people who we have in custody don't have a choice. So if we can do the best we can by that tiny group that doesn't have a choice, then we're doing very good for everybody else as well, I suspect. So that's a magnifying glass of the people that we provide service. The people who don't eat breakfast if we don't give them breakfast, period. And don't have toilet paper, we don't give them toilet paper, you know. So to me, that if you have a test on it, then test it with the people that don't have a choice. And Eve, your response, of course we do. Of course we do. Health, housing, and public safety are completely inseparable. And I think you've illustrated that. So I love it, the way it is.
Great. All right. Well, then we are going to, I think, move forward with this conceptually. Again, we can always come back to it, but I think for now, this is in a pretty good spot. So I'm going to move us on to goal 2, which was around vibrant communities. And the previous statement, invest in Lane County residents by fostering engaged communities, with affordable housing options, equitable opportunities, economic vitality, and a healthy environment. The suggested revision, invest in Lane County communities by prioritizing housing affordability, economic vitality, and civic engagement. Some of the feedback was we want to be careful about how we're using the terms affordable housing, so potentially flipping it to just say the concept of housing affordability. And then also, do we need to have healthy environment included here? So with that, 2 minutes within your small groups on this one.
We need healthy environment.
When we were in NACO, this was a huge topic, of course. This is your show. One of the sessions.
That was my suggestion. Affordable housing is not a term. It's just not. So, I mean, you know, what's attainable? So you have to really kind of massage that. And if you replace it with affordable with attainable, it's awkward. Invest in Lane
So we
County
need to
communities by
focus. I don't know what it
prioritizing
means.
housing attainability.
So maybe housing affordability.
It starts to get vague.
That's another idea.
But accessible also means it's got REMs.
Yeah, that's
It's
true.
not affordable. You're paying something, I'm paying something. It's subsidized.
I agree with the idea. You know, my house,
The more we keep using that term affordable housing, it has the perception that somehow something is being withheld from somebody, making it not
Yeah.
affordable.
affordability, affordable housing.
That's my big.
I know, I'm so glad.
I can't afford it. Well, I mean, I can sell my house in Salem, it's cheap. Salem market is way too high, but it's not as high as this.
Prioritizing housing.
This is extreme.
Yeah.
Well, most sellers are buyers.
Except right now, prioritizing housing, we looked at the surveys and the slides, it's across the board, it's affordable housing, it's not just affordable housing. So maybe we just like
Accessible. Kind of put
I mean, I think that there's a lot of.
windows around it. There's a house, it's got a door, it's big.
There's
It's accessible. You could move inside. Or you could just say housing without any plus.
Not say accessible, how about access to housing?
Access to
Housing opportunities.
Again, I guess let's say.
Or I do like access to housing.
Still keep that and not.
Oh geez, we were just looking. There we go.
prioritizing access to housing. So would it be like invest in Lane County communities by prioritizing housing, economic vitality, and healthy community engagement?
That's
I won't
where.
bring into what we talk, what is housing, you know, I mean, one of our providers one time said, well, housing is them Brian
I'm not
said,
saying I need it,
somebody
I just.
who's been living
I think it
on the side.
We used to have like.
And so, I mean, but access to housing, understanding that housing means different things.
Waste management.
Well, that's, I think that's why they use the term accessible
It's
housing.
not all about
Yeah, versus affordable.
Invest in Lane County communities by prioritizing
And
housing,
accessible is, there's
economic vitality.
Still don't have that.
roofs aren't utilized every night. Lake County aren't utilized.
Some of the bridges right there.
And housing availability
You can say partner with Lane County.
Yeah, that would be, that's kind of the only question.
means that we're
Okay,
building
I'm
it.
gonna bring us back together because I'm hearing a lot of excellent feedback here, and my guess is that we're gonna have a lot to discuss on this one, then let's discuss it in a group. So, initial thoughts, I heard around the room some comments of, is this just word salad of all of the things that we might do for a vibrant community? And I think that's a really interesting, fair comment. So I'm curious, what were some of the discussions that came up for you all?
Yeah. We talked about invest as maybe not being the word. I think at the end we were thinking maybe this is where partnership comes into our goals, that we partner with Lane County communities to prioritize. We also, I feel very strongly that healthy environment needs to be at this level. I actually think that housing affordability though is part of building a healthy environment. So if we wanted to pull something out, I would move housing affordability down and keep healthy environment up here at this level of the goals. Okay.
I'll just add from our group too, for me, even prioritizing, is the goal to prioritize them or is the goal to accomplish a thing or increase a thing or improve a thing. You could set a goal to prioritize and then not actually accomplish. I was just struggling with prioritizing the things being the goal versus actually achieving the things or improving or increasing the access to the
Yeah.
things.
Okay, how many folks talked about healthy environment and wanting to put that back in? Any other groups? I know that came up.
No, but
Great.
I agree with you.
Yeah, okay, great. And then how about this word of prioritizing? Do we want to change that to investing, improving? Are there other concepts that came up? Did anyone else talk about that concept of priority?
Yes. I've got words for this. I know, you all know what I'm gonna say, but,
Do we?
yeah, we do.
Good luck,
I really feel like foundationally, we have to invest in our revenue generating departments in order to do any of the work that we've talked about. So, yeah, and that's foundational. Yeah, because
Okay.
we're trying to build a strategic goal on a crumbling foundation. And it can feel like word salad if we're just like, yeah, we're gonna do all these things, but we're not investing in ourselves, you know?
Yeah, absolutely. And I know that we have an objective under one of the, I think the fourth goal area that talks about the financial stability of the county. And I think that might be the place where we see some of those specifics.
Yeah.
But I think that, to your point, we can't do any of these things if we don't have the resources to do these things.
Right.
Yeah, absolutely. Any other thoughts or feedback on this one? Yeah.
This is where even I differ a little bit. I think we take every word out except housing. I mean, because everything wraps into housing. The economy is wrapped around housing, civic engagement is wrapped around housing, public safety. Nobody's going to agree with me on that, but it's all about housing.
Well, I agree.
So I do agree, but it was in our first goal. That's what we had, Annie, go back to the first goal real quick.
Yeah, because within this, we do say housing. In this one, at least historically within your previous plan, under Safe and Healthy County was where a lot of the homelessness direct response came in, versus under Vibrant Communities where it was a lot of that more preventative work around housing affordability.
Then I'll take it one more step. We have, housing has to be the main element in every single goal that we have.
Okay. So the concept here is we could just switch Vibrant Communities to just focus on housing.
Nobody's going to
as a
agree with me
core
on that, but I
priority.
believe that housing encompasses everything. It's jobs, it's public safety, it's the environment, it's everything is in housing, and everything is in jeopardy. Every single thing is in jeopardy without housing.
Thank you. Any other thoughts? Yeah.
We talked a little bit about, like, you know, do we add in the healthy environment, but also we have a lens that talks about stewardship of resources. And through that, there's some elements, if we defined it to include environment, that could be a way to weave that in. We also talked about dropping affordability on the housing aspect. And we talked about attainability, but also just simply housing.
To Commissioner Farr's point, any kind of qualifying word seems to leave us short. And so for us, you know, by prioritizing housing, that said what we thought it needed to say and not worry about attainability or affordability, because like I said, no single word's going to modify that to give it the priority that it needs.
Well, I just would make it to a distinction that I think on the Safe and Healthy County, the housing piece is related to the services that we provide. And here it's more about what are the things that we're doing, and we'll be talking a lot with the board in the next few months around the collaboration work we're trying to do with other entities so it's less about direct service providing, but more about creating opportunities for private development of housing.
Yeah, absolutely. Great. Any other thoughts?
Just I don't know where civic engagement. We were a little confused on what civic engagement mean. Like, what is the county's role in that? Is that elections, or is that
Yeah.
Is that
And this will come up when we talk about some of the objectives too. I think right now how it is framed is really around wanting to make sure urban and rural communities are having voices heard within this and making sure that there's good participation no matter where you live within the county and that those communities are recognized. So I think that that's where the civic engagement piece really comes up, but it might not rise to this level. This might be something that we have, I think you had mentioned civic engagement is something that we do often as part of other work when we are actively, getting feedback on services, getting input on infrastructure, those types of things. So civic engagement might just be integrated into a lot of the rest of it, and we could potentially remove it from this high-level piece.
I do think about how goals need to be measurable. And so, as we drill down, you get to the different tactics and things that are, this is what we're gonna do and how we're gonna collect the data so we can measure how close we got, how we work toward a goal.
Yeah.
And so I see a lot of opportunity to talk about civic engagement. I'm not advocating for it to or not to belong here in a goal, but it can be as high level as election turnout.
Yeah.
Whether that's this organization's job to ensure people turn out or not is a different question with the tactics and whatnot we get to, or it can talk about committee involvement, advisory boards and bodies. It can talk about number of people that come to public comment. And then at the programmatic level, there's a million ways that the folks here that do programs can share with us what that looks like and what that means. And it can also just be basic. What we mean by civic is different than community engagement. Community engagement is like service delivery numbers.
Yeah.
To me, civic engagement has a real connotation about people engaging with the policy process as advocates or advisors.
Yeah, that's a great point, because there is a definite distinction there between civic and community.
Yeah, I was thinking the exact same thing. I was thinking something like meaningful community engagement.
Yeah.
And that's how we do the outreach.
Yeah, because I think that community engagement is something that is just built into the work in so many different places already. Yeah. Great, okay, so I think this is one that we're gonna take another stab at going through because there's a lot of different concepts in here. I am gonna keep us going to goal 3. This was on robust infrastructure, and some of the feedback we got here was, what do we mean by infrastructure? What is this concept actually? What are we talking about here? So the suggested revision here is to maintain and modernize county infrastructure, prioritizing investments in buildings, transportation, and emergency preparedness, because those seem to be the areas that people were most focused in terms of the objectives and potential activities. So with that, 3 minutes on this one. Any thoughts on this update?
Oh, in our groups?
I was gonna put you in groups, but do we need groups or do we want to just jump in? No. I feel like the team's ready to just go for it.
Probably
Any
Rob's.
thoughts on this one? Let's skip the small group. Yeah.
I of course like all those things. And infrastructure means more than just those things. Childcare is infrastructure. So there are other, maybe less tangible things that I would immediately come to mind if I'm thinking about infrastructure.
Yeah.
In our community.
Yeah.
And not just
the built environment.
The built environment.
Yeah, absolutely. And this one might be one where maybe we get through the objectives and we see what are we actually talking about here, and then come back to the goal and make sure that the goal is reflective of the specifics of what those are. Because I agree, infrastructure can mean many of these other things besides the built environment. And maybe that's a question for this group is do we want to primarily focus it on some of those physical infrastructure aspects? Any thoughts on that?
I think I would just offer that again, a big part of the goal of our strategic planning work is to focus, like sort of narrow funnel focus, that we can't do all of it. So there is this tension point of going, all right, what are, as important as stating the things we're gonna do is also an acknowledgement of what we're not gonna focus as much on. And that's the hard part.
Yeah.
Is saying that we don't have the resources to do everything, but in order to do anything really well, we have to decide what we're gonna focus on.
Yeah.
So I just, as a kind of broader thing, it's this, we're gonna have to make some sort of tough, and this is where I look at commissioners in particular to say like, you all have to define what the most important priorities are here.
Yeah. So with that in mind, I do think it might be helpful for us to go through the objectives that go alongside this, because that's where we'll be able to talk more about the specifics, like what do we actually mean to prioritize within this goal, and then come back to this goal and help marry them up. Does that seem like an appropriate approach?
I think you went first. You had your hand up first.
Oh, I was just, well, after Ann Rose said we're going to talk about it, then we'll discuss it amongst ourselves first.
I have a bit of trauma around the word modernize.
Well, if we're going to talk about it, Greg, let's talk about it. That was my concern too.
I'm on the 12th year of the Juvenile Justice Information System Modernization Plan. And I just think it's a public sector catchphrase for things that aren't going well and they know need to be improved.
Yeah.
Well, and should we be focused on modernize or resilience at this point?
Yeah.
Only in public health, modernize, right?
Well, I mean, IT, yes.
Overhaul, entirely replace. Yeah.
That is hilarious. That was my
Commissioner
sticking
Buck's point,
Oh.
I mean, what are we really talking about here in the broad spectrum of things? When she brought up childcare, I was like, oh, duh, I didn't even think about that. But I mean, does the word preparedness bear with it a definition that would be, including what Commissioner Buck brought up, would it be roads and computer systems and childcare? I mean, could the whole thing be shortened down to invest in our county for all levels of preparedness? Would that be enough to really mean anything and an attainable goal?
Yeah, great question. We'll note that, and then I think we should come back to it, because I think this one's really going to be dependent on what's actually defined within the goal.
I think Chair just used the word systems, and that might be, we're sort of staying in robust infrastructure is the heading, but maybe it isn't. Maybe it's systems and infrastructure. And then, because systems, childcare is a system. It's not it can be physical, right? It's location, but it's zoning and all that, but it's also a system.
Yeah.
And so that might be,
Yeah.
we're like hung up on too limited of a heading. And so we're trying to get too specific in what follows it to make up for it.
Yeah, and I think to that point about we want it narrowed down, infrastructure is a term that can mean many different things. It can mean that physical built infrastructure, it can mean technology infrastructure, it can mean systemic, how are we supporting people infrastructure. So I think that, again, this is going to be one where we want to focus in.
I think we also.
Morning, yeah, Mike Finch online. Sorry, I was just gonna.
Technology.
Broadband or telecommunications infrastructure. So I hear the general conversation if you're looking for less clarity, but wanted to call those out since broadband is a key initiative at the federal level. Thank you.
Thank you for that, and welcome for participating. Thank you for calling in. Thank you.
It's ironic that he came in broadband.
I think we need to remember that we still have the prior goal on, and healthy environments. You could also put some, like childcare as part of a healthy environment, even, or under economic viability. So, you know, we can kind of think about what goes in which of these two. How broad do we want to define infrastructure versus what could fit under those, the other header.
Yeah, and why are we doing these things? What's the ultimate purpose of potentially providing some of those other things? Yeah, great. Okay, then I'm gonna go to the last goal here before we get into objectives, which is people and organizational health. The shift here was mostly just to condense the language a little bit, invest in our employees, systems, and organizational health so that staff can thrive and residents can experience a more effective government. How are we feeling about that as a shift? Any thoughts?
In their houses.
Great.
I'm wondering, I don't know, maybe I'm off base here. I'm wondering if we need to specify employee systems and organizational health. I mean, invest so that staff can thrive and residents can invest wisely, or invest some way so that staff can thrive and residents can experience a more effective government. That, I mean, it just seems a little verbose for me.
Yeah, so simplify it even further.
Is it about staff retention and satisfaction? Because again, those are measurable things that we do measure, and there are, right? Yeah. So
That's typically, I think those would be the measures of, how are we saying, what constitutes, how do we know that staff are thriving?
so maybe we want to name that about, improve retention rates and employee satisfaction, job satisfaction, and residents experiencing more effective government. That's also.
Yeah.
I do think if I look at the 2-year, what I call my cheat sheet, we did have listed, and probably 4 measures, like retention rates, the diversity of our workforce, employee engagement year over year, and then much more specific as we broke out.
Yeah. And same in this one, we will have measures for each goal area, very specific ones, so I think that will be a great place for those to show up too. Any other thoughts on that?
Can I ask Eve what you think about invest in this statement? You'd mentioned invest being kind of a trigger word for some of your employees. It was on a different statement, but.
Well, I think invest,
Works there?
yes.
Yeah.
I think it's broader than dollar amounts, it's
Gotcha.
how we give our hearts to our employees too.
How we commit.
Yeah, commitment, great.
Thanks.
Okay, so I'm not seeing any big red flags coming up here. So I'm gonna say this is headed in the right direction. Yes, we're feeling pretty good about this. Raise a hand if you're feeling pretty good about this. Okay, I'm seeing some, okay, what are we not feeling good about?
I feel good about it.
Okay, great. What's not quite hitting yet in this statement?
I'll take a stab at it. It seems to me, like I said, it's wordy. And it almost seems like the two are sort of related, but because of the words, they become not relatable. I mean, the organizational health and that, we're talking about employees and then we're talking about so that people can experience a more effective government. Man, those are like kind of opposite topics when you kind of break them apart. And so I think the words kind of make that even more evident, in my opinion. I just think, I think it's missing the mark.
Okay, great.
I think the word invest is used a lot.
So maybe we need
And it
to
kind of
rethink
loses
that
its-
one meaning.
Yeah.
And I think tied to our employees, our workforce, who really are the lifeblood of everything that we do for our communities, invest is a little cold, a word that it's not as, I'm not sure what the right word is at the moment, but.
Support.
Support.
Yeah.
Yeah. Support, commit, something else that kind of describes the care that we might have for the employees.
And then I was really curious because I noticed the switch. So I'm really curious about the switch from employees to staff. Not that I have a,
I think it was just to make it less
shorter?
redundant because we already have employees in the
Okay,
first.
there you go.
First.
Yeah, that makes sense.
Yeah.
Workforce.
A term that I've used in the past is a productive and supportive work environment. And but that applies to staff. And productive and supportive gives you everything. It's involvement, but without getting too worried about that.
Well, productive also goes to systems, which can be quite challenging to do work with,
With non-modernized systems.
strap resources, in our TS areas for the technology and part of the systems that a lot of us use in a variety of different ways. I mean, employees work really hard and sometimes too hard when the systems aren't, as ideal as they could be. So I think it's important that stays tied in there.
And maybe it's these concepts of productive, supported, effective work environment. Because the whole reason that we want this, yes, we want our employees to thrive, absolutely. But the ultimate goal there is to be able to provide really effective services for our community. That's why we are here for all of these pieces. And so I think maybe if we can make that connection a little bit stronger and maybe focus more on some of those concepts like productive, supported, effective, that might get us headed closer in the right direction here. Is that what I'm hearing?
One caveat on the word productive is that the term productivity is utilized heavily in the healthcare sector and has a very negative connotation to staff who have felt forced to be overworked in order to meet productivity metrics. So I just want to be thoughtful about us putting a word in there that might be triggering for folks in that respect.
Great, that's very helpful. And I think that we hear that sometimes with the word efficient as well. Part of it is we do need to be efficient, but that's in the ultimate service of being effective. And so we find that that term is often a much more applicable term within government setting, where we want to be effective at what we are doing, and we can't do that if we have incredibly inefficient systems. But I think that's a good point. Excellent, okay. Well, with that, I'm gonna say, let's do a 2-minute stretch break, very quick, and then we're gonna get into objectives.
All those doing jumping jacks this side of the room, all those push-ups that side of the room.
Spinning it around just like the Commissioner Carousel.
Commissioner Carousel.
Stretch.
I know what that I like the snack bite beef sticks you got there. Fun size.
Yeah, a little protein, a little good.
This makes you feel good when you're eating 3 wrappers. Open up 3 wrappers.
You can have 3 times as many.
I was just saying, that's what I was getting at. Turn red, that makes me feel good when I open up 3 of them.
Or not enough.
We had lots of cheese and they never lived to.
Yeah.
objectives, the objectives of the strategic plan. So how all of these work together, we as a group and through the conversations today have had a lot of insights and really have kind of walked the line about how prescriptive and detailed do we want to be in some of these broader statements, how concise do we want to be, how targeted do we want to be in these goal statements, and the objectives are a really great opportunity where we can bring in that level of specificity and through development of those objectives maybe connect them back to an updated goal. And so really thinking about how all these pieces work together. So Inga-Rose mentioned when we were looking at that pyramid, your goals are kind of those longer horizon, the larger buckets, the major areas of work that the county is committing to kind of over the next 3 years and beyond. Objectives is that first layer where we break it down into more tangible areas. And so it's where we get more specific about the different areas of work that will include the activities. So this is an example of how all of those pieces really kind of work together. Kind of from kind of the broadest down to the most specific, if we have a goal around developing and supporting a highly skilled workforce, an objective might be to retain high-performing employees, and an activity that you would undertake in order to achieve that would be to provide professional development opportunities or establish clear pathways for career advancement and development, or provide competitive pay or benefits. All of those are really more specific activities that the county could undertake in order to help it achieve its objective and then connect back to its goal. So when we are looking at the objectives for each goal area, we provided you a couple of them in the survey and you provided us your responses. So they are also on the walls around you. And we asked you to go through and kind of rate how critical each objective was. Because one of the pieces that we heard about kind of in the early kind of fact-finding and information gathering stages is we want to make sure that the plan stays really focused, that it stays achievable, that it is clear, concise, compelling, and it gives you a roadmap for a really manageable amount of work kind of over the next 3 years. So what we, under goal 1, safe, healthy county objectives. So the goal, we have these original goal statements that will kind of connect and update based on the feedback that we have here today. But thinking about, equitable integrated approach to health, behavioral health, public safety, really addressing those notions and initiatives around responding to homelessness. And the objectives that we have here are also on the wall, but I'll go through the feedback that you all provided or that survey respondents provided in terms of what are some of the most critical objectives to focus on? What are kind of the biggest priorities of the county kind of over the next 3 years? So emergency response was one that was rated as pretty critical, and this really looks at public safety resilience. So thinking about sustainable funding for public safety, availability of public safety in rural counties or in rural communities and how that shows up, and being able to respond to disasters. I think natural disasters. You all had the hat trick of, I think, 4 major disasters in 3 years. And so you got very good at responding to them. And so capitalizing on all of that to really make sure that you can kind of take all past lessons learned, put them into some good disaster planning for anything that might come up in the future, just kind of knowing that is unforeseen but something that you can plan for. Providing behavioral health services, public safety, sustainability, those two are very connected. Homelessness response, environmental resilience, and public health workforce. So what we would like to do in, again, kind of those groups of 3 is think through these objectives. If you are a member of county staff, think through the initiatives that might fall under these objectives or the activities. And then what we want to know is, do any of these need to be consolidated? Is there anything missing? Or does anything maybe need to move, since that goal discussion is really fresh in our minds about kind of what is captured and represented under each goal area. So we'll give you a couple of minutes, again, groups of 3, and then we'll kind of share out anything missing, anything that could be kind of put on pause, thinking about how we want to focus the plan over the next 3 years, or anything that should be moved.
One other thing I'll add is, are there any objectives that we could remove entirely from the list? We're really interested in hearing your feedback on that, especially here, you'll see the dark green is what we're rated as critical priorities, light green is high priorities, and then we have medium or lower priorities. So especially for the ones that have less of that dark green and bright green, we encourage you to consider, can we take these out of the plan entirely? It doesn't mean that you're not gonna do any work in that area, but we wouldn't call it out as a very specific priority within the plan.
And the last thing that I will say to add on to that is that we know that there are other strategic plans that are going to be developed alongside this one. So does it make sense to have connected pieces represented in the county strategic plan, but then get that more specific detail in other plans that the county has developed? So a lot of things to hold in your mind as we're having these discussions, but yes, is anything missing? Could anything be removed? And then does this make sense to have under this goal area? So we'll do 3 minutes, kind of group discussion, and then we'll kind of share back if that works. Or I think we learned last time, sometimes a group discussion just works best. So how are people feeling? Do we want to discuss as a group and share, or do we just want to dive in as a group?
I'm head nods to dive in.
Yeah, we've lost a few.
Yeah, I'd say dive in.
Okay, great. Let's discuss anything on this list, and I'll go back. It's a little challenging to see at the top, but I can read it out. These are the statements that would go along with kind of each objective category to help kind of further define it. Emergency response, so enhancing public safety and resilience by investing in preparedness efforts to reduce harm and accelerate the recovery from disasters. It was noted as a critical objective to include here under a safe and healthy county. I see head nods.
Mm-hmm. And maybe just discussing these as a whole too. How are you feeling about this set? Is there any that you could remove? Any that seem really, really critical that you would absolutely not want to remove? Any thoughts in general?
Just they're also interconnected. You can't. Environmental resilience, if we did better at that, we would maybe have fewer disasters, or it wouldn't take as much resource to recover, and it's the public health workforce that does that, or on the homelessness response, it's the behavioral health and homeless, like there's just so much crossover across all of these to one another in varying degrees and combinations. It's really hard for me to sort of, goes to that thing I've mentioned before, like order of operations. Sometimes you have to do a thing that isn't your number one priority to make it even possible to achieve that priority. Mm-hmm. So your order of operations takes a different hierarchy than the way you express what your goal is.
Yeah, those enabling components. I think we talked about investments in a lot of investing here today. Financial stewardship and sustainability, making sure you have appropriate development of revenue sources in order to enable the work of a lot of these things. So some of those enabling and interconnected pieces.
The last thing I just want to say, public safety really talks about law enforcement.
Yep.
And that isn't always cover everything that includes the public being safe. Who is the public? Safe from what? Like it's a little weird.
More investing in community-based programs and reducing the strain on them. So maybe a little bit more inclusive of those other elements that go into public safety that are not just looking at kind of the police force or fire, maybe some of the more obvious ones. Okay.
Steve. No, go ahead. You can go on, then I have a point.
So I have 2 opinions here. One is, well, I have more than 2 actually, but around bullet number 2, I have 2 opinions. One is that behavioral health is vitally important. We have very important strategic initiatives related to behavioral health, and healthcare access in our community in every way has dramatically declined since the last time this strategic plan was done. And when we looked at our community survey, overall healthcare access was a major priority for our community. So I would say a couple of possibilities. One is that line item could be turned into healthcare access, of which we have a number of behavioral health initiatives as well as other healthcare initiatives. Or we could add healthcare access as a bullet, but I think it's gotta be there, given the environment that has changed. Similarly, when we did the last strategic plan, we were kind of still in the middle of COVID. And public health workforce, there's a lot less funding and energy around it. So can that be a strategic priority right now in the same way? I don't know that that's the case. I wish it were, and I gotta be real about where we are. I wonder about that with environmental resilience too. We're in a space in the next 3 years of this strategic plan where there will be a lot less federal funding probably in this area. Is this something, how much can we take on with local initiatives when we probably will not have access to the kind of federal funding that we've had access to? So those would be the things that I might consider making modifications on.
And I'll just, again, agree with everything that Eve said, and I'll be a broken record in saying that this plan ultimately will not be valuable if it's just the laundry list of everything that we need to do. I was at the Eugene Chamber Local Government Affairs Committee 2 weeks ago talking about strategic planning and our budget. And I shared the current one-pager and strategic plan with them, and there were some comments around the table from business folks in the community who were like, "Well, it looks like you're trying to do everything." You know, you can fit everything under. So this is going to be a meaningful plan and a roadmap for us. The extent to which it really helps us say, okay, what are we leaning into? It's not just because things aren't on here doesn't mean we're not doing them. It doesn't mean that they're not important in some way. It just means that we're saying organizationally, you know, we're not spending all of our time on these things. And so I would agree with Eve. I think that public health is critically important. But it's also on there because it was a time at which it was all the things you said, same with environmental. But we've got to keep that mindset of this is going to be valuable if it really focuses us on where we're going to spend our time. If we have everything on here, we'll spread the mediocrity.
When I appreciated the flagging this is attached to the departmental strategic plans, because there are things that, you know, I'm owning that aid these significantly, but they reside at the departmental level and are appropriate that I know it's connected to that larger vision, but it doesn't necessarily need to reside or have a big presence here at the larger vision. When you say public safety, I know deflection, juvenile justice, and parole and probation are all parts of that, but I don't need initiatives to be at the county-wide level.
And you know what's interesting is that we have financial sustainability under kind of goal 4. And so since this one talks really specifically about public safety funding, does it make sense to potentially include this? Is it too high level or is it too specific as an objective? Should it actually be an activity under kind of that financial sustainability component when you're looking at the picture comprehensively?
2 things. Mary has mentioned the need for like our foundational funding model, which is outside of things we can control, but there are things we're working to influence with legislative changes. And then what Steve said is really helpful to me to remember. This is a 3-year, this is not, what is Lane County government? This is over the next 3 years, what is this organization gonna be especially focused on and measuring and attending to? Again, that just this is a helpful reminder. So where was I going with an actual point? That what you were just saying, our goal is to shore up sustainable funding models or identify structural and sustainable funding fixes for some of our most critical areas. And so the advocacy that we're doing to try to get A&T better funded supports public safety funding, right? Like there's just something, that roll up of those high level goals.
I also think about a focus on using the public safety system appropriately, which feeds into stabilization center, deflection program, mobile crisis, case management in the jail, that right now the public safety system is being used inappropriately, which impacts the safety of everyone in our community. So So maybe that becomes the focus here and that the funding sustainability can go somewhere else. I think it would be problematic for us to not have something specific to public safety as an objective under this goal, but massaging what it is may be what
I
we're
like
looking
that.
at.
Thank you.
Yeah, yeah, because it gets more to kind of the programs that are in place and everything that was mentioned versus kind of just looking exclusively at funding. Yeah, and that connects back to that goal of having a safe, healthy community because, you know, funding is one part of it, but what is safety action? How do people feel safe? Kind of across the different areas.
You know, so often safety is how do I feel right now at this moment in time. And
Yeah.
if I'm living in Pleasant Hill and my neighbor is beating his children, domestic violence, and I have nobody to call,
Right.
to me, that's the most important thing in my life right now. So we have to bear in mind that public safety is not just an overarching umbrella. Public safety is being able to be responsive now when people need the help right now. And how do we get the resources in place to have that redundancy in our systems that we can respond right now? If somebody was being beaten in Pleasant Hill right now, what would happen? What would happen if your child was being beaten in Pleasant Hill by a gang of bullies? Who would you call? Well, don't call the sheriff, because they're not coming.
Yeah. Okay, so I'm hearing a couple of themes here. So number one, I think we might want to shift, instead of just having this be so specific to behavioral health, talk more about public health access.
Healthcare
access. Oh, health. Yeah, oh yeah, I did write that. Okay, I got it. Healthcare access, which kind of includes those programmatic elements, specifically behavioral health, but then also gives you the flexibility to update kind of based on when the plan was developed in COVID. Public health, workforce, and environmental resilience. I heard that these are okay to maybe remove as objectives, that they have the changes in the federal funding availability kind of would make it more difficult to prioritize moving the needle on this in the plan for the next 3 years. I see head nods. Great, and then public safety, so moving the funding component maybe under that and then transitioning this to talk more about the programs that are involved in public safety. A lot of the ones to look more at the system holistically and how that's coming together.
That makes sense to me as long as on the funding side it's really clear about the places that we're constrained. I mean, because there's a very focused effort to look at funding for certain public safety pieces. So as long as that's called out more specifically in the funding piece, and then on I think if the behavioral health piece is changing more to healthcare access, which I mean will be again for commissioners to weigh in on this. I do think this is an important time because there is some risk of losing broader healthcare access. If there is work to more clearly define the system of public safety, that behavioral health does really fall under that system, right? Public safety being law enforcement, prosecution.
Some parts of behavioral health.
Some parts. Well, that's true. That is true. Yeah.
I think we risk increasing the stigma if we roll behavioral health exclusively on public.
And I guess I think we need to get some policy guidance from the board on, are we actually saying that we're not going to call out behavioral health as a core objective and we're going to talk more about healthcare access? Like, that's a big decision. I'm not saying it's the right or wrong thing. I'm just saying that's a big distinction.
And I think you could not lose that behavioral health component when you're looking at specific activities. And then also thinking about how having both of those under the same goal area, the language around how those work together could create some of that connectivity. Yeah.
I've got one suggestion on the homelessness response, which of course I think is a major issue. But you brought up an interesting point, what are we actually going to get funding for? And we know in the new administration that that is not a priority. But housing productivity and homelessness response is a huge priority from the state.
Right.
And still very active, and I think something that we still need to absolutely keep as a priority. I would suggest expanding it to housing productivity and homelessness response to incorporate what we might be able to obtain with the state support. Knowing that we need to focus on the things that we think we're going to get resources for.
And that's a good point, because we talk about housing under vibrant communities, and so maybe looking at how those two work together to make sure that they connect, and maybe what needs to get strengthened in the plan in order to make sure that those two pieces are tied together. Because those are both, housing, when we were going through those goal updates, a safe, healthy housed county was something that ended up in goal 1, but the actual physical infrastructure of having housing available for people to move into is something that's definitely called out in vibrant communities, and so does that continue to make sense there? And I saw a hand.
I was gonna go into a little bit of a different direction around homelessness response, so I don't know if we wanna keep talking about the housing and development and homelessness connected or not connected before.
No, let's talk about homelessness response here, and then I think that's a great segue to then go into the goal 2 objectives.
Okay. I was just thinking about, I think you asked a question around other plans being developed too.
Yeah.
And I think that is interesting, just thinking about the Poverty and Homelessness Board is almost done with their strategic plan, and that has been a very robust process. And so I just want us to think about how we connect those plans and how they lift up and connect to this plan too, because it has the nuance, and then I think you all have to decide what pieces you want to really lift up. But I don't know how to do that. I'm just thinking about our community health improvement plan too. That will be done at the end of this year, and just how are we connecting those other plans here and painting that deeper connection of work and accountability that's happening in lots of places and lots of ways in our county.
I do think there's in recognition of that, and the way we're calling this homelessness response, and that seems very limited in terms of actually the scope of, like, we talk about public safety as a system, and to me there's more like, it's more around housing and shelter, or the service, that sort of the broader level of services that when we talk about tenant support and rapid rehousing and permanent supportive housing, and shelter and homelessness is a component of that, but there's and then we talk about housing on the vibrant community side. To me, that's always been more the what we call affordable housing. It's more of the private development, like how do we work in the land use places, make land more developable, and expand the affordability of housing. That doesn't mean that Lane County is doing that directly. We're not developing the housing, we're not necessarily funding the housing, but we are doing things that allow private housing development.
We're facilitating.
Yeah, to be able to happen. So they're both important, but they're sort of, we call them housing, and both, but they're different sort of parts of housing. That makes sense?
Well, part of that, Steve, is we devoted part of the fairgrounds property to the Keystone. That wasn't an easy transition because the fairgrounds wasn't ready to lose the property, and it became permanent supportive housing. So we can be more aggressive internally, but there's limited success in that because we don't have that much resource. But it's giving the other people that hunger that you have for housing, that we have for housing, and facilitating that in a way that makes it easier for people to do things that we aren't able to do. And you mentioned the Poverty and Homelessness Board's strategic plan. It has one, yes, as does MWMC. I mean, everybody has a strategic plan. It's important, and Steve, you said this from the day you came here. It's important that all the strategic plans that are involved for the specific, whether it's a community health improvement plan, Poverty and Homelessness Board, it's got to fit into our plan. Not necessarily being called out, but making certain that there's no conflict between the plans that makes it more difficult for people to understand our plan.
Yeah.
I kind of piggyback on what we just heard. I agree with all that in substance, but I think there's also a need for consistency among how these are listed. Like up here we have behavioral health, we're not saying addiction and mental illness response. And I think it's important that we say behavioral health. I think homelessness response gets at what Steve was, at least in part in my mind, what he was saying, which is, I think that's the wrong way to phrase it. You know, what we're doing is looking at services that we can provide, behavioral health services or whatever it happens to be. But I don't know, that's just the way I look at it. It struck me that they weren't like apples and apples. There was like some apples and oranges mixed in, and it didn't make sense to me.
Yep, and I think that clarity can help when we shift some of those, like it's healthcare access, underneath it is some behavioral health where we could kind of get into some of those more specific programs, right? When you're looking at public safety, shifting that, so it's looking more broadly at the programs and initiatives within it rather than just funding forward and some of those things. So I think that extra level and getting it more to the same fruit will help with some of the updates. I want to keep us moving forward so we can have get through the discussions of the remaining goals. And I think that we're in a good place also to go to continue that housing conversation. So in Vibrant Communities, we have housing community engagement, inclusive community support, and economic development. When we asked you what felt the most critical, inclusive community support and housing kind of rose to the top. Community engagement was also up there. And then kind of bringing in the caboose is economic development, which is pretty consistent with some of the conversations that we had about the county's role in building the job availability, supporting business growth, working with chambers of commerce and things like that. So, housing, the objective statement, in coordination with local partners, expand housing affordability. I think that that's one that we talked about when we were revising that goal. It's less about housing affordability and also about housing availability. So making sure that houses supporting kind of private development, zoning codes, how we are providing kind of incentives to encourage the development of housing, but then also making sure that it stays affordable, that housing prices are something that is in consideration, not necessarily something the county can influence, but is something that impacts the availability of housing. Community engagement, so building trust and strengthening civic participation by continuing to focus on transparency, outreach, ensuring residents across urban and rural areas have a voice in county decision making. This is one that's really interesting to have as an objective. I think also in that goal conversation, it really was baked in to just how the county operates. It's so embedded just in the ways in which you carry out your work. Thinking through, does it make sense to call this out as an objective really specifically? Inclusive community support, so advancing fairness and inclusion by ensuring all residents, especially systemically marginalized and under-resourced populations, receive equitable access to county services, legal protections, and support systems that promote dignity and safety. And then the last one, strengthen the local economy by expanding job opportunities and fostering business growth. So same conversation, is anything missing? Could anything be eliminated? Thoughts on these objectives under what it means to have a vibrant community and how the county plays a role in that?
Could you bring them up on this?
Yes.
We're missing the connection to the chip here. So we'll need to think about, and that comes into kind of the healthy environment.
You said missing the connection to the CHIPS?
Community Health Improvement Plan.
Thank you so much.
Yeah.
Fritos.
Yes, maybe decreasing those would be part of the chip.
Oh, they'll just make more.
That would be supporting economic development, yeah.
Okay.
I know we're wanting to streamline, I'm trying to add in. I'm just wondering if this housing bullet isn't where we get at some of the infrastructure piece that we sort of put aside earlier. Because a lot of what we can do is that baseline infrastructure and readiness, which makes it more affordable for a developer to come in and do housing. So like, we're not the developer, but we can create, we can do some work around the broadband and the water systems and the, utility access to make it more affordable for the developers. So something that ties it to that infrastructure. And then on the economic development side, I feel like this is another place where the systems work around, for instance, childcare. And it's about supporting both the sector of childcare workers, but also the actual access to childcare, which is vital for economic development and opportunity. People can't go to work if there isn't a safe place for their kids to be. So I feel like this might be a place and a way to plug some of the things, the loose ends that we have. And that make it clearer what the path is then for the initiatives that support the goal.
Okay.
And then I'm wrestling with the middle two, community engagement and inclusive community support, and whether there isn't some, they're very distinctly different, but is there some economy and opportunity to combine them in some way?
Yeah. Okay. Other perspectives or thoughts on the objectives?
I like what Lori just said, particularly around housing, and I think that in coordination with local partners, what is Lane County's role? And we mentioned it earlier. Sometimes it's just facilitating, making it easier for people to do things, removing obstacles. So I might change that in coordination with local partners, facilitate housing availability to prevent homelessness. So lose affordability and supply. I'm repetitive, that single word. It's just wordsmithing, but I think it may be easier for the casual observer to understand.
Okay.
I'm curious, you talked about county role, and childcare has come up a couple times. Can we talk a little bit about what the county's role in that type of infrastructure is?
Lori, could you start?
Well, we actually, Alana can give some examples of things we have done for our own workforce. Some of it is around land use and zoning and the regulatory environment that sector has to operate in. We can sometimes directly influence or sometimes be an influencer to the bigger system. But internally, we've done some things that would be more for HR, for Alana to speak to about initiatives we've done to support our own workforce.
And it was listed in our last strategic plan, explore long-term childcare options for our workforce. And I can tell you our Workforce Wellness Solutions Manager, since day one, had a huge focus on connecting into the community to look for different partnerships and opportunities, ultimately partnering for a pilot with a small childcare center, help them with their launch, but also to give access for employees here to have a space. The continuing challenges, no surprise, are around affordability. And that's not an issue that we as Lane County, an employer on our own, can just resolve that. That is a much bigger kind of connected conversation, all the way up, I think, to the legislature.
But we can do things like pilot the programs that we have to show as a model, and providing subsidy and support, technical advice.
And being able to demonstrate the success or not great success, and then the whys behind that, which I think then inform these other efforts of where were the barriers and how did we work through those. Currently, our UVO 3 p.m., our public policy lab, we do have a group of students that is working on a more, not so much just for our workforce, but generically looking at issues and barriers in childcare. And they just finished a very robust survey, and I know at some point we'll be doing more with that, and I believe at some point that will also come back to the board for sharing of the information. So we're doing things like that, but ultimately a big bucket of money to lower the cost for our employees is not a place,
Yeah, a lot of it is in partnership.
It is.
That's what we're trying to do is find, sort of like I think on the housing affordability, county's not gonna be the one that is gonna fix that problem, but maybe there's some things we can do in partnership and around the edges to support improving in that area.
Steve, I think the people who work here
with children. When school says, well, we're not gonna have school on Friday, I mean, what do you do? You know, so for the, I'm looking at you specifically, you know, because it really is a major issue for people who work here. And I believe, and I'm just gonna throw this out, we need to provide childcare, close to the workplace. In ways that we aren't, and not just in partnership, Steve. It's a big discussion, but we've got to provide our own childcare that allows people to be able to know where their kids are close by. And I'm a grandfather right now, so I'm not a parent, but people are parents. When you need childcare now, there's nothing else you need more.
I think that's the important distinction, is that we are doing it. I see you writing a note on the, which one? Oh, the people in organizational health, that we are doing it and need to continue to find ways to do it for our workforce. And then for the community, our role, for our community, the role is partnership. For our workforce, the role is how do we relieve barriers and provide
But I
opportunity.
think it's also the workforce development piece, we've talked about it in behavioral health, and then just even naming it. Just talking about it, this is the baby steps conversations we were having about homeless services 10 years ago that got us to a point where now we know that's a thing we have to talk about and that's front and center. So it's just naming it, that it's even an issue is a huge step forward.
I mean, it's also a economic development subcategory in some ways. If we had listed childcare instead of economic development, I bet it had been as high as housing. And it is that critical to people these days. And so for us not to name it, I think would be somewhat neglectful, but where, you know, in all these objectives, I don't really know the best place. But it is also business opportunities for the community.
And actually, we've seen that partnership, I know, with our workforce wellness manager reaching out to our economic development group and saying, you know, hey, let's double up so we can both be aware, let's partner, let's make sure we're hitting all of the different parts of our community through both our internal lens for employees, but also knowing that that can double for the rest of Lane County, since we're such a desert, right?
Yeah, and connecting all the way back to when we were talking about our strategic lenses and that collective impact, and how maybe kind of shifting that to focus on partnerships and making sure that you have clearly identified partners, that you have a shared goal, that you have some kind of a direction and a plan forward and performance measures. I think that could be a great place to maybe distinguish the difference between how the county's role in providing child care support through partnerships benefits the workforce and contributes to economic development. And you can also kind of have it represented, but in a different way, talking about the actual kind of funding availability that is there for employees specifically. And so I could see how that could show up in both places, but still be unique, because they are, you know, you can always take great lessons learned and things that were successful for employees and see how you could bring that into partnerships. But I think that connecting that strategic lens and that partnership piece is an important part. And I like the idea, since childcare, interestingly, has come up a couple of times today, connecting it into kind of this statement about the objective. I see a lot of head nods.
I'd be remiss when you talk partnerships, at least internally. You know, I think the significance is also displayed in that one of our employee resource groups, our ERGs, is a Child Care Connections. It's a group of employees from across the organization that meet monthly and, you know, just connect around these kinds of topics. And it's continued to be as relevant as it was when we started that ERG in COVID. So it's very, very lively.
Great. Okay. All right.
Yay.
Yes.
As I'm listening to all this, I'm kind of obviously putting in my housing mind, because like I said, I'm one that's building housing in this room. So I think the missing piece in the county, after talking to Gabe at Everyone's Village last week, we put those pieces together, and there's a progressive way to get people from the streets into housing. And I think the old conversation is we just need to build housing and stuff people into them, which doesn't do them any good because they don't engage in progressive services that actually get them from point A to point B. He was saying, and we were agreeing, that there was from the street, there's the missing piece of housing that gets people into temporary housing, which then works them into permanent housing. And so what happens is once they get to permanent housing situation, like a single living, like a shed kind of situation on his property, the old model that the YMCA used to have of single room occupancies is now outzoned. And in fact, the state of Oregon has made that more difficult to build and zone than ever before. And so that becomes the missing piece of how a lot of these folks who are veterans or Social Security people on fixed incomes could actually have a permanent house room in a village of small little cottages around that could actually stay there permanently. And so I think when we're talking about funding being missing and things disappearing and the state's goals of housing, we really need to start looking at the infrastructure barrier that multiple small units of housing on a single property has become, as a developer, a lot more of a hassle to build. Septic sewer lines, individual sewer lines versus collective, gathering, all those kinds of things has permitted that area of missing housing laddership to be eliminated. And I think that's really, if I was to focus that in, from my perspective, I would try to focus it in as the county needs to advocate from the state on getting that back online.
Did I hear you emphasize SROs?
Yes.
Good, okay.
Okay.
For example, my 94-year-old mother-in-law still lives in her original house because, A, it's paid for, and my sister-in-law lives with her. She's on a fixed income. Every time things go up, at some point, like I said, we've seen in statistic presentations in front of the board that the older community is going to be eventually priced out, and that homeless sector is going to grow. So, other than families coming back into the scene and making multiple generational housing, then we're going to have to be in that crisis as well.
Great. Okay. So lots of connectivity between the housing pipeline. When we are looking at vibrant communities, potentially combining or looking at combining community engagement and inclusive community support, really thinking through that childcare perspective and economic development and bringing that into the picture, and then a little more work to refine that housing objective. So it is kind of interconnected across a lot of these pieces, thinking about housing readiness, thinking about land, thinking about zoning rules, thinking about incentives, thinking about the development pipeline. Okay. Next up, goal 3, this is where we have our ambiguous infrastructure. Yes, our favorite word outside of investing for today, infrastructure. So goal 3, maintaining and we're investing in resilient infrastructure that creates the highest return for safety, community, connectivity, enjoyment of life, and local economic success. 5 objectives here. So that top one, I'm going to choose disaster preparedness. So disaster preparedness, emergency response, so looking at, these are the actual recovery plans, policies, and procedures to safeguard community assets, make sure there's no interruptions to vital county services. Looking at cybersecurity and IT infrastructure, here's our favorite, our probably 3rd favorite word, modernizing our IT systems, going on year 12 now. Enhancing data protection measures, improving digital services to meet the needs of residents and businesses efficiently and securely. This is also another objective here that built environment, so building infrastructure, investing in county-owned buildings and facilities to ensure usable infrastructure for years to come. Waste management infrastructure, so improving environmental sustainability and public health by upgrading waste management systems, and where we also look at transportation infrastructure. I think we heard earlier today also about kind of bringing into the picture the broadband infrastructure as a major kind of federal initiative that you all is integrated into this work that could be included here in either an activity or as an objective in and of itself. So same conversation when we look at the priorities here. So disaster preparedness, like kind of alongside emergency response, was really kind of a top priority for folks. Cybersecurity and IT and building infrastructure kind of neck and neck there. Waste management and transportation kind of rounding us out there at the bottom. So when we look at these, anything missing, anything could be combined, anything need to be reworked or removed. When we think of the next 3 years, what we can accomplish, making sure the plan is achievable. Judy.
I was just gonna say, and Dan had to step out, but similar conversations around, when there are potential departments having other strategic plans. One idea was just, maybe the bottom two or a combination of some of the others could potentially be in a, public works strategic plan if we're trying to streamline.
Yeah. Yeah, okay. Yeah.
So a lot of these things are ongoing, and in some of the other conversations we were having, they're about, okay, what objectives could we get done in the next 3 years? So I'm wondering, what do we want to do here with this? Are we going to try to name things we want to get done in the next 3 years to be consistent? Or are we just naming the things that we're going to be doing all the time anyway?
Yeah, so we have a couple of activities that we kind of pulled out into this that we all heard from you through both the survey and in interviews. So this really, waste management, the clean lane resource facility, some of those much larger kind of multi-year projects. We have the capital improvement plan, and then facility updates for a couple of court places and SO, Sheriff's Office, thank you. And then disaster preparedness, resiliency hubs, public health reserve corps, and emergency preparedness plans. And this is where that references also the emergency operations plan, multi-jurisdictional natural hazard mitigation plan, I'm not talking about a mouthful, community wildfire protection plan. And so those are some of the more discrete activities that would get kind of rolled into some of these objectives about what you'll need to make sure stays updated, because that might be connected to some regulatory requirements, and then also making sure that those are captured in kind of the next 3 years and continuing to move some of these larger initiatives forward.
Typically, when we look at the activities that go under the objectives, it's both what is currently in progress that you're already committed to completing within this next 3-year period, as well as what are some of the potential things that might be coming up during that time. So it is a mix.
Just make sure.
I might want to weigh in here. I think the cybersecurity and the emergency procedures, hey, that's going to get us either way. We're going to have to respond to those in the next 3 years. So those are kind of givens in my mind. The bottom two, I think I would agree, could be dropped off. The building infrastructure portion, I think as we look around at our buildings and talk to Christian and those folks that are doing the maintenance and all that, and even the new consent item that we passed yesterday on making an offer on the Wells Fargo building, I think that for the next 3 years needs to be a really critical goal for us as a county, because if you've ever toured the building and went down to that big old rusty tank that holds all that water in there, oh my gosh, I hold my breath every time I walk by it in the morning. So, if we don't start really in the next 3 years, perhaps, just as a next 3-year goal, look at our own building infrastructure as a functioning and a vital asset to the community, that's going to bite us in the butt big time. So we have to make some arrangements and some priorities to that, knowing that cybersecurity and emergency systems are always going to be pulling at our coattails.
Okay, great perspective.
There's a technical element to that also. You get targets of opportunity. You didn't know we could do this, but suddenly we have an opportunity to do this. So be ready to take advantage of things as they come up. You didn't like targets of opportunity?
Mike is texting me and would like to comment on this. Mike Finch, who's watching us. So go ahead, Mike.
Your date on the back.
Hey, good morning. Thanks, Judy. I agree that cybersecurity and IT infrastructure are going to happen anyway. That being said, just for awareness, artificial intelligence and advancements are driving faster than ever, so it's worth a mention in that respect. Additionally, there is, I think, a general trend of pushing more of this responsibility locally than at the federal level that we're seeing. So just want to highlight those trends as we consider it. And then just one other item, I guess, to call attention to that's not pointed out on here, which I call it data as infrastructure. So investments and thinking about our data as a crucial and critical infrastructure itself, just both for analytics and decision making, is just something worth considering. I can't say whether to advocate for it or not to call it out, but I just wanted to highlight those forces and trends for people to think about as you noodle this. Thank you.
Thank you, Mike.
I do think, for waste management is a fairly constricted term, but I think about wastewater in addition to that.
Yeah.
And some really critical needs that we also need to address over the next 3 years, not alone. We need help from the state. We need to work with some municipalities, some unincorporated areas. But when you look at meeting our housing production goals, if we don't address that particular infrastructure challenge, we will fall flat.
Yep.
We get 19 more
It's
homes.
very specifically Crestwell right now.
Yeah.
Junction,
Junction City.
Mapleton.
Great.
True.
Okay. Excellent.
Yeah, I mean, consider that point too as well. Crestwell's down to 19 lots now they can allocate for septic. So by us joining forces with the federal government or some sort of thing, getting our leachate line and combined with that opens up a whole housing, economic development piece that we hadn't thought of.
Well, and the powerful entity, which is MWMC, how do we expand that to incorporate some of the outlying communities into our wonderful, wonderful metropolitan wastewater management system?
Great. Okay. I think this was good. Really get clarity around what infrastructure means. Add some of that tangibility. Last but not least, goal 4, people and organizational health. More investing in our employees who are once you see it, you can't unsee it, which is great.
3 years ago, we liked that word.
Investing in our employees who are the backbone of our organization and invest in our systems and organizational health so employees and residents can thrive and experience a more effective government. We have quite a few objectives under this one. Top priority is financial sustainability. That is a huge one, which is not surprising, just given all of the changes that are currently taking place and kind of what's anticipated, looking at a lot of different things. So state funding, property taxes, federal funding, and grants, all of that coming into the mix, especially in your state in particular. People are seeing that come to a head. Employee engagement, internal process efficiency, advocacy, and lobbying. Here's where we start to see partnerships and intergovernmental relationships called out pretty specifically, leadership and workforce development, and then Board of Commissioner support. So employee engagement, sorry, I'm gonna have to go to the back to read that top one, but that one is financial sustainability, so looking at alternate revenue generating options, really capitalizing and understanding and building plans in order to make sure that you have a balanced budget moving forward, that you're able to fund not only what you are doing now, but also how you are able to address any unfunded mandates or anything that's coming up. Talking about that component really specifically being an enabler to all of the other, or the majority of the other work that you kind of have on your plate. Employee engagement. So this is making sure you all are staying connected and engaging folks, prioritizing employee well-being, ensuring competitive and equitable compensation, enhancing internal communication and collaboration, internal process efficiency, so enhancing county operations, advocacy and lobbying, advancing county priorities, through advocacy efforts, building strong relationships with policymakers, and securing legislative and funding support for key initiatives, partnerships and intergovernmental relationships, strengthening collaboration with regional governmental and tribal partners to address community needs, leadership and workforce development, building a future-ready workforce by more investing in leadership development and mentorship programs. And then the last one, Board of Commissioner support, so supporting governance by providing ongoing resources and professional development for the Board of Commissioners. So looking at this list and not forgetting kind of financial health, but it's a top priority. I don't think that one is going anywhere. Anything missing, anything that could be refined, anything that could be removed? When you think about the next 3 years, yeah.
So I do think, I wish I could read that, but identifying new funding sources, we can't lose focus of the fact that we are not adequately funding assessment and taxation currently, not at a state level, but also at, I think there's 2 pieces of it. There's at the county level, and then also there's another funding source outside of the county level. But at the county level, we are not funding this mechanism adequately and haven't been for a long time. And that has to do with so many things. But I just thought I'd say, you know, I appreciate looking at new funding sources, but we have one and it works, but we have to invest in it to see that return. And until we do that, let's not look for new avenues. So.
You cannot say that enough, Mary. Keep saying
No, I'm not saying I'm sorry. I wasn't at the table 3 years ago, so that I would have said it then.
Now, Mary, you're specifically talking about having more people to get the taxation that we're leaving on the table. That's the
Correct.
argument you're talking about. Yes,
Correct.
so just so everybody's clear on that.
Yes.
Yeah.
It's not like more deputies writing tickets pay for themselves.
Right.
That doesn't. More assessors in the field pay
Right.
for themselves beyond
Yep.
pay for
Yeah,
themselves.
get us what we're owed.
Yeah. Measure 50 exception value is hands-on manual. It is not guaranteed. So there's a growth, but I'll stop there.
Don't stop.
Don't stop, yeah. Come on.
Fantastic. Okay, other objectives.
One that I've thought of, and it might be a little bit incorporated in internal process efficiency, but I think calling out like innovation a little bit. I think both from the like federal side of, you know, evaluating what's coming ahead, being able to either pivot or be innovative with what we do, but also how it connects to this goal is providing that structure to potentially be willing and able to innovate. We also have, you know, like our connection with the U of O, 3 p.m. students, and this kind of like opportunity to potentially, you know, in the next 3 years, could we be more of like an innovative hub of the unknowns, and then test it and try it out potentially? It's just one to try and call out here.
Yeah.
I love this kind of idea that I think you're hitting on about, because Lane County in so many ways, when we look at different programs and sort of statewide, I think about our deflection work, or name the number of ways in which we're viewed as a leader despite limited resources, that we're actually leaning into, you know, trying to be the best, or actually are, you know, on the leading edge of those things. And so thinking about how we can continue to push, I think it's one of the things that sometimes organizations that are financially constrained have this kind of scarcity mentality of like, well, we're just gonna do what we can do, woe is us. And we don't really have that attitude here. It's like, yeah, we don't have enough money to do everything, but we're still gonna try to kill it.
Well, I sort of hear that too, is we expand our capacity to do the things we're trying to do by not thinking it all has to come from us and that it all necessarily costs money.
Right.
The
We can
relationships.
still be involved or leverage or push for things, yeah.
And then it doesn't have to look like what it's looked like, right? Like, yes, it's more people, but it's also, can we use AI? How can artificial intelligence help in areas specifically in my department, but also in other departments, you know? Not totally replacing the function of the person, but how can we enhance, right, the services we provide?
How we capture that here is important, because this is like strategic plans typically are like statements of what we do and, you know, these lists of things, but then there's the aspirational piece. And there's something in here, I think, kind of about what you're saying, everyone is talking about, that is unique to Lane County, particularly for a county government that's big, that doesn't have enough resources, but we still try to like lean into the solutions and the innovation.
I think that goes back to the values, that maybe that's where the excellence piece needs to be massaged, to talk about innovation.
Innovation through scarcity, certainly.
We increase our capacity, you know, expanding capacity through innovation. It's not always expand capacity through more money or more people.
That's right.
I do wonder about changing that third bullet to innovation and process improvement, rather than just having the internal process efficiency.
Doesn't quite grab you in the same way, does it?
And it's broader, right? And then I also, so I was reflecting on this word invest. And 3 years ago, we were swimming in ARPA dollars, right? And so we had all this money to invest, right? And we put all of these bullet points because it felt like, because we had to spend the money really fast, because that's the way government works. But,
Interesting.
I do think about maybe the bottom 2 bullets, can we incorporate that into the employee engagement bullet and just have a broad, because those are part of how we engage people. We develop people and we support people, just to maybe have fewer dots that we have to worry about creating sub-dots on.
Yep, and I think that that's a great point. Also thinking about, is engagement an activity that falls within kind of workforce support, or, you know, in what ways could those kind of work together rather than kind of being so segmented? And I also really love the conversation around innovation, especially tapping into your partnerships and new thought partners, because it is real when you have shifted from swimming in ARPA dollars to then looking at, okay, now we have an uncertainty in our funding environment. Is it available? In what ways is it going to change? How are we maximizing what we're currently doing? And where are we coming up short? Looking at how you can get so focused on what you are doing that it can be really hard to create space for innovation. Like, where does innovation come from? Conferences, spending, like going on walks, I don't know, being in nature, the moment, they call them shower thoughts, right? When you are thinking, it's the, also for me, it's like 5 minutes right before you fall asleep, you have the amazing idea, right? And so creating space internally, when you think of that, can be extremely hard to do. And so looking at in what ways could we tap into the collective brain trust, which we heard from the very beginning people are very good at. You're involved in the community, you're involved in associations, you're involved in resource groups, you have community partners, you have the university. So how can you really capitalize on that? So I like it.
You know, one thing I will add is that ARPA dollars, yes, but we're a poor county. We have a permanent rate that is so low, and yet we're leading in so many different ways. And I think it's on Friday we had a director's retreat, and innovation through scarcity was, if you said it or Steve Adams said it, and it resonated with me because that's what we've been doing for so long in Lane County. And this partnership with U of O is a great example of that. We're really good at that.
All right, we've got 1 minute left. Want to close this out, Jesse?
Yeah, thanks for keeping us on track, Rose. We're gonna invest in this next 45 seconds. So for next steps,
Make sure to modernize it.
we're gonna modernize this last 40 seconds. The last component of it, we didn't have a chance to get to it today, which is totally fine. What we're going to connect back with you all on is the activities component. So like I said, we got some feedback through the survey, got some feedback through our interviews. We have some of that captured here. We're gonna do another round where we want to gather. Now that we have some of these pieces a little bit more crystallized, what are the activities that we need in order to populate these different components? And so I think all of the refinement that we did here today is gonna be really helpful. And I have the clicker, so I'll advance. And so the next step after that is we are now going to make the updates. We're going away, we're gonna provide back some different options where we didn't kind of hit a resolution or consensus or clear direction on some of those pieces. And the next step for us is drafting the strategic plan. So once we get that draft together, it's gonna go through another round of review from, from you all, board and management team, then we'll revise, then it will go out to the community, we'll get their perspectives and feedback in that additional round before we finalize. And so we'll do that through open houses. And so that's what's coming up next. Got 30 seconds left. Oh, sorry, I'm over. I'm over by 30 seconds. Okay, thank you everybody for your investments here today. Have a great rest of the week.
All right, great job, the Moss Adams teams. This meeting will be adjourned. Our next meeting will be Tuesday, April 1st, 9:30 Harris Hall. We're adjourned.